I sat in the dimly lit private dining area of Atlanta's most exclusive restaurant, listening to my own father read a legal document designed to officially disown me. My sister watched with barely contained glee, while her husband smirked, completely confident that they had finally broken my spirit and stolen my last remaining tie to the family business. They expected tears. They expected a desperate plea for forgiveness. Instead, I calmly picked up my pen, signed their ridiculous contract, and prepared to drop an $8 million bomb that would leave them with absolutely nothing. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your worth and tried to tear you down. You will definitely want to hear how this night ended. My name is Zoya. I am 35 years old, and for my entire life I was the designated scapegoat of my family. The heavy mahogany doors of the obsidian room closed behind the waiter, sealing the five of us inside the private dining space. The air in the room was thick with the scent of expensive truffle oil and the bitter tension that always accompanied my family gatherings. Soft jazz played through the hidden speakers, a sharp contrast to the hostility radiating across the table. I smoothed the linen napkin over my lap, admiring the tailored lines of my new charcoal suit, a reward to myself for a massive milestone no one at this table even knew I had reached. Across from me sat my parents, Thomas and Evelyn. They were the picture of Atlanta high society, draped in designer labels and projecting an image of flawless prosperity that they fought ruthlessly to maintain in our community and at our church. Next to them sat my older sister, Alicia, radiant and perfectly polished, leaning affectionately into her husband, Connor. Connor was a corporate attorney who always looked like he was one golf game away from a promotion. He was white, arrogant, and wore a perpetual sneer whenever he looked at me, convinced his law degree made him the ultimate authority on everything. We had not even ordered appetizers when my father cleared his throat. He did not ask how my week was. He did not ask about my health or my business. Instead, he reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. He placed it onto the pristine white tablecloth and pushed it toward me with a single manicured finger. The heavy paper slid past the crystal water glasses and stopped right next to my plate. "Go ahead and open it, Zoya," my father said, his voice dropping into the authoritative tone he usually reserved for his subordinates at the family real estate firm. I picked up the envelope. The paper was heavy and expensive. Inside was a legal document drafted with aggressive precision. I scanned the first few lines, my heart rate remaining steady despite the venom in the room. It was a formal severing of ties. A legal surrender of my 15% minority stake in the family real estate business. That 15% was not a gift from my parents. It was left to me directly by my grandfather, the man who actually founded the company, and the only person in my family who ever believed in my intellect. "You have left us with no other choice," my mother, Evelyn, chimed in, adjusting her diamond necklace. Her tone was icy, completely devoid of any maternal warmth. "We asked you for one simple favor last month. We asked you to leverage your personal credit to help Connor secure the bridge loan he needed for the firm. It was a simple family transaction, and you turned your back on us. You turned your back on your own sister." I looked at Connor. A month ago, he had made a catastrophic investment mistake, sinking hundreds of thousands of dollars of the family firm's liquid capital into a dead-end commercial development. When the banks refused to extend their credit, my parents had come to me demanding I take out massive loans in my name to cover his tracks and save their public image. I had refused. I had spent the last 5 years building my own boutique supply chain startup from the ground up, living in a modest apartment and pouring every ounce of my energy into my business. I was not about to risk my hard-earned financial security to fix the reckless mistakes of a man who had never respected me. "Your selfishness has disgraced this family," my father continued, leaning forward, his eyes narrowing with a familiar disgust. "I built this company into what it is today, and I will not allow your stubborn, ungrateful attitude to jeopardize our legacy. Connor is family. He made a miscalculation, but he is stepping up to fix it like a real man." You, on the other hand, have contributed nothing to our empire. You sit in your little apartment playing CEO with your little tech project while the adults handle real business. You have always been difficult, Zoya. Always fighting against the current. Always making things harder than they need to be just to spite us. Alicia sighed dramatically, resting her perfectly manicured hand on Connor's arm. We really did try, Zoya. We tried to include you in our lives, but you just cannot seem to be a team player. It is exhausting, honestly. Mom and Dad cannot take the stress of your rebellion anymore. It is bad for their health and terrible for our standing in the church. I listened to their chorus of blame, feeling a strange sense of detachment. Years ago, a speech like this would have shattered me. I would have internalized their cruel words, convinced that I was inherently flawed. Growing up, Alicia was always the fair-skinned, protected golden child, while I was the darker-skinned scapegoat, expected to carry the family's emotional burdens without a single word of complaint. In the past, I would have cried right there in the restaurant. I would have begged for them to reconsider, promising to do whatever it took to be the daughter they wanted. But the woman sitting at that table was no longer a frightened girl desperately seeking their approval. I was an analytical, data-driven founder who knew exactly how to read a room and exactly how to read a contract. I read through the clauses carefully. They were not just asking for my 15%. They were demanding a complete legal separation. The document stated that by signing over my shares, I was officially relinquishing any future claims to the family estate, waiving my right to any future inheritances, and absolving them of any financial liabilities or obligations connected to me. It was a complete disownment, dressed up in corporate legal jargon. Connor had clearly drafted it himself, thinking he was being incredibly clever. He thought he was backing me into a corner, forcing me to hand over the equity they desperately needed to use as collateral to save their sinking ship. I looked up from the document. My father was glaring at me, waiting for my typical defiance. My mother was sipping her red wine, refusing to make eye contact. Connor was practically vibrating with smug anticipation, a smugness born of immense privilege and unearned confidence. He truly believed he had outsmarted me. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, invading my space. Look, Zoya, Connor said, his voice dripping with condescension. Let us make this easy for everyone. Sign the paper. Walk away. If you try to fight us on this and keep those shares, I will tie you up in litigation for so long you will go bankrupt just paying your legal fees. You do not have the resources to fight me in court. Just sign it, give us what we need, and we can all move on with our lives. I stared at Connor as his threat hung in the heavy air of the restaurant. Before I could formulate a response, a small flicker of movement caught my eye. My gaze shifted slightly to the left, where my sister sat, sipping her sparkling water. Nestled perfectly against her half-empty crystal wine glass was her smartphone. The screen was dark, but the tiny red recording indicator pulsed silently at the top corner. She had angled the camera lens directly at my face. They wanted a show. They were waiting for me to lose my temper, to raise my voice, to give them the exact reaction they needed to validate their narrative. If I yelled, I would instantly become the angry and unstable daughter they had always painted me to be. I knew exactly what Alicia planned to do with that video. She would send it to the family group chat and the church prayer circle with a fabricated message about how she was simply trying to help her troubled sister. It was a dynamic I knew intimately. Growing up in our household, the rules were never the same for both of us. Alicia was born with our mother's fair complexion, hazel eyes, and loose curls. She was the prized possession, the protected golden child, who was shielded from every consequence. If Alicia broke a valuable antique vase, it was treated as a clumsy accident. If I breathed too loudly, it was treated as a deliberate act of defiance. My darker skin and tightly coiled hair meant I was treated less like a daughter and more like an indentured servant. I was the one expected to handle the heavy lifting, both physically and emotionally. When the family business struggled during the recession many years ago, I was the teenager doing their bookkeeping after school while Alicia was sent to expensive pageant coaches and elite tennis clinics. I was raised to be the foundation they could stand on, expected to carry their burdens while remaining entirely invisible. They never praised my straight A's or my college acceptance letters. My academic achievements were simply the baseline expectation, while Alicia's mere existence was celebrated as a triumph. They conditioned me to believe my only value was in what I could provide for them. Connor noticed me looking at Alicia and cleared his throat loudly, demanding my attention back on him. "Do not look at your sister Zoya," he snapped, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "Look at me. I am giving you a lifeline here. Your mother and father are being incredibly generous by not suing you for breach of fiduciary duty right this second. You have a legal obligation as a minority shareholder to support the financial health of the company." I almost laughed out loud at his sheer audacity. Breach of fiduciary duty. He was throwing around legal terms to intimidate me, completely confident in his assumption that my boutique tech company was just some struggling hobby. He genuinely believed I was sitting in my apartment scraping by, easily intimidated by his big corporate vocabulary. Connor viewed himself as the ultimate protector of the family wealth, conveniently forgetting that it was my grandfather who built the company from nothing. My grandfather was a man who fought through decades of redlining and systemic discrimination to acquire those properties. Connor just married into the money and managed to lose a massive chunk of it in a single bad commercial real estate deal. "You have to understand your position, Zoya." Connor continued, leaning back and interlacing his fingers with a smug smile. "You do not have a real career. Your little tech project is cute, but it is not generating the kind of revenue to sustain a drawn-out legal battle with a major real estate firm. We have an entire legal department ready to bury you in paperwork. We will subpoena your personal bank accounts. We will drag your startup into discovery. We will make your life a living nightmare until you surrender those shares to us." Alicia leaned forward, then ensuring her face was slightly in the frame of her hidden phone. She adopted a falsely sympathetic tone, her eyes wide with fake concern. "We do not want to do that to you, Zoya. We really do not. But you are forcing our hands today. Mom and Dad have worked too hard to let your selfishness ruin everything they built. Just sign the paper. We can pay for your dinner tonight as a peace offering. You can go back to your quiet little life and we can save the family legacy." They really thought I was helpless. They had spent 3 decades trying to shrink me down, trying to make me believe I was small, unworthy, and completely powerless against their united front. But their fatal flaw was their arrogance. They were so blinded by their own prejudices that they never bothered to look into what my tech project actually did. They never noticed that the supply chain software I developed had been quietly revolutionizing inventory management for major retailers across the entire country. They were too busy looking down on me to see that I had built a massive empire right under their noses. I looked down at the contract again. The thick paper felt heavy in my hands. The signature line at the bottom practically mocked me, waiting for my surrender. The restaurant around us continued its quiet hum of wealth and privilege. Silverware clinked against china plates at the surrounding tables, while waiters poured expensive wine for oblivious patrons. My father tapped his index finger against the table, impatiently irritated by my silence. "We do not have all night, Zoya," my father said, his voice hard and uncompromising. "The waiter is going to bring the appetizers soon, and I want this business concluded before we eat. Pick up the pen and do the right thing for once in your miserable life. Stop making this harder than it needs to be." I reached into my bag, not for a tissue to wipe away tears, and certainly not to pull out my checkbook to beg for their love. I pulled out my silver Mont Blanc pen. The sharp click of the cap being removed echoed loudly against the quiet, luxurious hum of the private dining room. Without speaking a single word, I smoothed the heavy linen paper flat against the table. I did not hesitate. I did not shake. I signed my name with swift, fluid strokes on every single line Connor had marked with a neon yellow sticky tab. My signature was bold, permanent, and final. I slid the thick stack of papers back across the table toward my father. For a few agonizingly long seconds, no one spoke. My father stared at the document as if it were an optical illusion. He had come prepared for a screaming match. He had braced himself for my typical defiance, expecting me to fight tooth and nail for my grandfather's legacy. He certainly had not prepared for instant, silent compliance. Slowly, his shock melted into a deep, settling satisfaction. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling a long breath. My mother let out a loud, theatrical sigh of relief. She immediately reached for her crystal wine glass, taking a large celebratory sip of her expensive Pinot Noir. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "I am glad we did not have to make a scene. It is about time you acted like a mature adult, Zoya. Maybe now you can finally focus on finding a nice husband instead of playing business owner." Alicia reached forward and stopped the recording on her phone. She tapped the screen with her perfectly manicured nail, a triumphant smirk spreading across her face. She had not captured the explosive meltdown she desperately wanted to broadcast to the church congregation, but she had captured my complete surrender. To her, that was just as satisfying. Connor eagerly grabbed the document from in front of my father. He practically salivated as he quickly flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the margins to ensure I had not missed a single initial. He tapped the papers against the table to straighten them, puffing out his chest with unearned pride. "Good girl," Zoya, Connor mocked, flashing his blindingly white, perfectly straight teeth. "You finally decided to use your brain. This is honestly the best outcome for everyone involved. Now you can go back to your little apartment and your little computer projects without getting in the way of real corporate business. My legal team will file this with the state tomorrow morning. You are officially out of our hair, and we can finally secure the capital we need to save the firm." I looked at the four of them. They were so utterly convinced of their own superiority. They were so blinded by their lifelong habit of underestimating me that they failed to realize they had just walked willingly into a trap. I smiled. It was a genuine, relaxed, and deeply unsettling smile. The gloating around the table abruptly stopped. My father narrowed his eyes, his decades of cutthroat business experience suddenly warning him that something was terribly wrong. The atmosphere in the room shifted from triumphant to incredibly tense. I reached back into my designer bag. This time I pulled out my own envelope. It was sleek, professional, and bore the embossed gold logo of my startup. I set it on the table, placing it exactly where their disownment letter had been moments before. "What is that?" Alicia asked. Her voice had lost all of its previous confidence, replaced by a sudden creeping anxiety. I did not answer her directly. Instead, I opened the envelope, pulled out a single sheet of heavy stock paper, and began to read aloud. For immediate release, I read, my voice steady, clear, and commanding. "Zoya Supply Chain Solutions announces its official acquisition by Vanguard Holdings International. The cash buyout finalized early this morning is valued at exactly $8 million. The words hung in the air like a physical weight. The color drained from Connor's face so fast he looked physically ill. Vanguard Holdings International was not just any corporate conglomerate. They were the apex predators of the financial world. More importantly, they were the exact entity that held the crushing overdue debt on my parents' real estate firm. When Connor made his catastrophic commercial real estate gamble last month, he had leveraged the family's assets through a shadow lender that had just been bought out by Vanguard. They were the ones currently threatening to liquidate my family's entire legacy. I looked directly at my father. His mouth had fallen slightly open, his carefully curated posture completely collapsing. As part of this acquisition deal, I continued maintaining relentless eye contact with him. I will be stepping into an executive advisory role on the Vanguard board. My specific department will be overseeing the restructuring of delinquent real estate portfolios in the southeastern region. Which means, Dad, when Vanguard begins foreclosing on your properties next week, the liquidation paperwork will cross my desk for final approval. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a thick, suffocating, terrifying silence that swallowed the entire room. My mother's wineglass hovered inches from her mouth. Her hand was trembling so violently that a drop of dark red wine spilled over the rim, staining her expensive silk blouse like a drop of blood. She did not even seem to notice. Alicia looked completely lost, her eyes darting frantically between me and Connor, waiting for her husband to fix this disaster. But Connor was paralyzed. His prestigious law degree could not save him from the reality of what had just happened. The woman he had just harassed into giving up a worthless 15% stake was now sitting on $8 million in liquid capital. Not only that, but I now held the keys to his entire professional and financial future. By the way, Connor, I added, my voice cutting through the quiet room like a surgical blade, I really want to thank you for drafting that disownment contract so thoroughly. I actually had my own legal counsel review a copy of your standard severance agreement earlier today. The clause where I am legally severed from all family debts, past obligations, and future liabilities is particularly ironclad. You made absolutely sure that I cannot be held responsible for a single penny of the massive bankruptcy this family is about to face. You protected my $8 million better than my own lawyers ever could have. I am completely shielded from your mess. Just then, the heavy mahogany door opened. The waiter approached our table holding a silver tray with the bill for the private room reservation and the expensive bottles of vintage wine my parents had ordered to celebrate their anticipated victory. The timing was absolutely flawless. I took the black leather binder from the waiter's hand. I stood up calmly, smoothing the front of my charcoal jacket. I tossed the leather binder directly onto Connor's lap. The total is $1,200, I said, looking down at the four people who had spent my entire life trying to destroy my confidence. Enjoy the appetizers. I hear the crab cakes here are excellent. I picked up my bag, turned on my heel, and walked out of the room. I did not look back. I walked down the plush carpeted hallway of the restaurant, leaving them sitting in the cold, terrifying reality of their own making. When I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the obsidian room and stepped out into the warm Atlanta night, the air had never tasted so sweet. For 35 years I had carried the weight of their expectations, their insults, and their endless demands. But tonight that weight was gone. I handed my ticket to the valet, feeling a profound sense of peace settling over my shoulders. The war was far from over. Knowing my family, they would not go down without a brutal fight. But as I slid into the driver's seat of my car and pulled away from the curb, I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer the victim of their story. I was the author of mine, and the next chapter was going to be entirely on my terms. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office in downtown Atlanta. The skyline stretched out before me, a concrete jungle I had quietly conquered while my family thought I was drowning. My desk was a massive slab of polished white marble, clean and uncluttered, a stark contrast to the heavy, suffocating mahogany and dark leather of my parents' world. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, savoring the quiet hum of my company waking up around me. Beyond my glass door, my team was already bustling with energy. The press release had gone live at exactly 6 in the morning, and the financial world had reacted exactly as I anticipated. My phone had not stopped vibrating since the moment I opened my eyes. Notifications piled up on the screen in a relentless stream of congratulatory emails, calendar invites from financial news outlets, and alerts from industry blogs, analyzing Vanguard Holdings International and their latest $8 million acquisition. I was no longer the family disappointment. I was the headline. Just as I sat down to review the final transition documents, my personal cell phone lit up with a custom ringtone I had not heard in weeks. It was my mother. I stared at the caller ID, watching her name flash across the screen. Less than 12 hours ago, this woman had sat in a private dining room, sipping an expensive vintage wine, while her husband and son-in-law tried to legally erase me from the family tree. She had looked at me with a cold, hollow disgust, treating me like an infected branch that needed to be pruned to save the rest of the tree. I let the phone ring 3 times. Part of me wanted to send her straight to voicemail to let the silence be my final answer. But the analytical side of my brain, the founder who always needed to understand her opponent's strategy, was too curious. I wanted to hear exactly how she planned to spin the unmitigated disaster she woke up to. I swiped the screen and brought the phone to my ear. I did not say hello, I just waited. "Zoya, my darling." My mother's voice flowed through the speaker, dripping with a sugary sweetness that instantly made my stomach turn. It was the exact tone she used when greeting the bishop's wife at Sunday service. Her voice was light, airy, and entirely devoid of the venom she had spat at me the night before. "Oh, sweetheart, your father and I are just sitting here in the breakfast nook reading the business journals. We are so incredibly proud of you. I cannot even begin to tell you the joy flooding my heart right now. $8 million. My brilliant, beautiful daughter. I kept my expression perfectly neutral, leaning back in my ergonomic chair. The audacity of her pivot was almost impressive. She was attempting a masterclass in psychological manipulation. There was no apology for the disownment contract. There was no mention of Connor and his legal threats. There was absolutely no acknowledgement of the fact that I had left them staring down the barrel of their own financial ruin just hours prior. Instead, she was trying to seamlessly rewrite history, attempting to insert herself into my victory, as if she had been my biggest cheerleader all along. I knew you had something special brewing, Evelyn continued, her voice taking on a conspiratorial, intimate whisper. Your father and I, we have always known your potential. That is exactly why we pushed you so hard last night, Zoya. We had to test your resolve. The business world is brutal, and we needed to know you had the thick skin required to survive. That contract was just our way of teaching you tough love. We wanted to force you to stand on your own 2 feet and claim your independence without relying on the family safety net. And look at you now. You passed the test with flying colors. You proved you are a true powerhouse. We always knew you just needed a little push to spread your wings. I let her finish her performance. I let the silence stretch over the line, forcing her to sit in the uncomfortable echo of her own lies. My mother hated silence. It stripped her of her control and forced her to confront reality. Do you really think I am that stupid? I asked. My voice was flat calm and completely devoid of emotion. Excuse me, Evelyn stammered, the fake warmth fracturing slightly under the weight of my response. Zoya, I am just trying to congratulate you on your little success. There is no need to be hostile. It is not a little success, Mother. It is an $8 million corporate acquisition that makes me the executive who will be reviewing the foreclosure on your house. And please do not insult my intelligence by calling last night tough love. You did not push me to succeed. You tried to rob me of my grandfather's equity to save Connor from his own staggering incompetence. You brought that contract to the restaurant because you truly believed my business was worthless, and you thought I was weak enough to fold. You wanted me out of the family because I refused to be your financial human shield. Now wait, just a minute. You are misunderstanding our intentions. She tried to interrupt, her voice rising in a panic. I am not misunderstanding anything. I cut her off, my tone sharp and authoritative. I understand exactly what is happening right now. You woke up this morning, read the Vanguard press release, and realized that your designated family scapegoat is suddenly the only person who can stop your entire empire from collapsing. You are terrified. You and Dad are looking at a total liquidation of your assets, and Connor is probably pacing holes in your living room rug trying to figure out how to avoid a massive malpractice suit. You called me because you want a lifeline. You want me to use my money to fix your mess and pretend last night never happened. We are your family. Zoya. Evelyn finally cracked the desperation bleeding through her carefully constructed facade. You cannot just turn your back on us like this. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. We belong in your life, especially now. It is your Christian duty to help your family in times of crisis. What will the congregation think if you abandon us when we need you most? I let out a short, humorless laugh. You gave up the right to call yourself my family the moment you slid that envelope across the table. I signed the paper. Mother. You and Connor made absolutely sure that document was legally binding. You wanted a clean break. You wanted zero association with me. You have exactly what you asked for. Do not call this number again. I am not your daughter anymore. I am just the Vanguard executive handling your debt restructuring. Have a nice morning. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button, cutting off whatever desperate plea she was about to launch into. I set the phone face down on the cool marble of my desk. My heart was beating steadily. My hands were not shaking. For the first time in 35 years, my mother had tried to manipulate my emotions, and I had felt absolutely nothing but pity for her. I turned my attention back to the glowing screen of my laptop, diving into the acquisition transition files. I had an empire to integrate and a new future to build, and I was not going to waste another second looking back at the ashes of my past. I had barely scrolled through the first page of the merger agreements when the intercom on my desk buzzed loudly. My assistant, a sharp and fiercely protective woman named Sarah, spoke through the speaker with an urgency that immediately caught my attention. "Zoya, I am so sorry," she said, her voice tight. "There is a woman here who completely ignored the front desk." She bypassed security in the lobby and rode the executive elevator up. "I am calling building security right now to have her removed." Before I could even press the button to reply, the heavy glass doors of my office violently swung open. Alicia stood in the doorway, breathing heavily. The transformation from the polished, gloating woman at the restaurant 12 hours ago to the frantic, disheveled mess standing in front of me was staggering. Her designer trench coat was haphazardly tied over a wrinkled blouse. She was wearing oversized dark sunglasses, which she quickly pulled off to reveal red, swollen eyes and streaked mascara. Her perfect blowout was completely ruined, the blonde highlights tangled around her face. "Wait! Please do not call security!" Alicia practically screamed, holding her hands up as Sarah stepped into the office behind her phone, already pressed to her ear. "Zoya, tell her to stop. I just need 5 minutes. Please. I am your sister." I looked at Alicia, then nodded slowly to Sarah. "It is fine, Sarah. Give us a moment. But keep security on standby on this floor." Sarah cast a scathing glare at my sister before stepping out and pulling the glass door shut behind her, sealing us inside the quiet luxury of my office. Alicia immediately collapsed into one of the white leather guest chairs across from my desk. She dropped her expensive handbag onto the floor and buried her face in her hands, letting out a loud, theatrical sob. It was a performance I had witnessed 1,000 times throughout our childhood. Whenever Alicia broke a rule, failed a class, or ruined something valuable. The tears were her first line of defense. They were a weapon she wielded with absolute precision, designed to disarm my parents and shift the focus from her mistakes to her supposed emotional fragility. It had always worked flawlessly on them. But sitting behind my marble desk, watching a 32-year-old woman try to cry her way out of financial ruin, I felt absolutely nothing. I did not offer her a tissue. I did not get up to comfort her. I simply leaned back in my chair, steepled my fingers, and waited for her to deliver her lines. "Zoya, my life is completely over," Alicia gasped, looking up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Connor is a monster. I had no idea. I swear to you, I had absolutely no idea what he was doing behind my back." She paused, waiting for me to gasp in shock or rush to her side. When I remained completely silent, she pushed forward, her voice trembling with manufactured desperation. "He woke me up at 5 this morning, pacing the bedroom. When the news of your Vanguard deal broke, he completely lost his mind. He finally confessed everything to me. He has been hiding massive debts. He took out secret loans, Zoya. He leveraged our house, my car, even my personal savings account to try and cover his tracks with the family firm. We are completely bankrupt. The bank is going to take my home. I am going to be out on the street." She leaned forward, gripping the edge of my desk, her knuckles turning white. "You have to help me. You are the only one who can. Mom and Dad are dealing with their own mess now, and Connor's law partners are already talking about forcing him out of the firm. I need $500,000. Just a loan, Zoya. A sisterly loan. 500,000 is nothing to you now. You have 8 million. You can write me a check right now and save my life. I will pay you back every single cent, I promise. Please, you cannot let your own sister be destroyed by that awful man." I let her words hang in the air, echoing off the glass walls of my office. It was truly fascinating to watch her attempt to rewrite the narrative. Just last night, Connor was her brilliant, wealthy husband, and she was proudly resting her hand on his arm while he threatened to bury me in legal fees. Now he was a monster, and she was nothing but a helpless, innocent victim who needed a $500,000 rescue package. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly. Alicia blinked, the tears momentarily stopping as she processed my cold tone. "Zoya, I am begging you." I reached forward and woke up my laptop screen. I clicked open a secure folder on my desktop, one that was heavily encrypted and filled with hundreds of pages of legal due diligence. Let me explain something to you about how corporate acquisitions work, Alicia. When a massive global conglomerate like Vanguard Holdings prepares to write an $8 million check to a founder, they do not just look at the software. They look at the founder's entire life. They conduct exhaustive, invasive background checks to ensure there are no hidden liabilities, no blackmail risks, and no financial entanglements that could compromise the deal. I turned the laptop around so the screen faced her. Displayed on the monitor was a complex financial flowchart highlighting a web of shell companies and offshore bank accounts. Because I was a minority shareholder in our parents' real estate firm, Vanguard had to run a deep audit on the company to ensure my 15% stake was legally clean before I transferred it. I continued, my voice steady and unforgiving. They looked into Dad. They looked into the firm's creditors. And naturally, they looked into the firm's primary legal counsel, your husband. Alicia stared at the screen, her mouth slightly open, the color rapidly draining from her face. I know exactly what Connor did, Alicia. I have known for 3 weeks. I know that he did not just make a bad commercial investment. He committed severe financial malpractice. He created shadow LLCs to funnel liquid capital out of Dad's firm and into high-risk offshore accounts, hoping to double the money and pocket the difference before anyone noticed. But the market tanked, the money evaporated, and he was left holding a massive illegal deficit. That is why he drafted that disownment contract for me to sign. He needed my clean equity to offer to Vanguard as collateral to stop them from auditing the books and finding his fraud. But I did not know any of that. Alicia cried, her voice pitching higher in panic. I am his wife. He hid it from me. I am a victim here. I reached out and tapped a specific highlighted section on the screen. Do not insult my intelligence. Connor is arrogant, but he is not stupid enough to commit wire fraud without a firewall. I read the incorporation documents for those shadow LLCs, Alicia. Connor did not put his own name on them. He put yours. Alicia froze. The theatrical tears instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. You are listed as the primary managing director on 3 of the holding companies that hold the fraudulent debt, I said, leaning closer to her. So you can drop the Innocent Betrayed Wife Act right now. You either co-signed those documents knowing exactly what he was doing to fund your lavish lifestyle, or you were willfully ignorant and signed whatever he put in front of you so you could keep buying designer clothes and taking trips to Europe. Either way, legally, you are completely complicit. I pushed the laptop back toward myself and closed it with a sharp snap. The Bank of Zoya is permanently closed, Alicia. I am not giving you $500,000 to pay off your fraudulent debts. I am not bailing you out of a disaster that you and your husband actively created. For 35 years, you have taken everything from me. You stole my college fund, you ruined my credit when we were in our 20s, and Mom and Dad covered it all up to protect your precious reputation. You wanted me legally severed from this family. Congratulations, we are severed. Alicia slowly stood up. Her hands were shaking violently. The realization that I held all the cards, that I knew all of her dirty secrets, completely shattered her facade. The desperation in her eyes hardened into something incredibly ugly and vicious. If she could not manipulate me with tears, she was going to revert to the only other tactic she knew: pure, unhinged malice. Alicia dropped the act. The transformation was instantaneous and chilling. The trembling lower lip and the wide, innocent eyes vanished in a split second. Her posture straightened, and the lines of her face hardened into a mask of pure, unfiltered resentment. She reached down, picked up her expensive designer handbag from the floor, and placed it deliberately on the corner of my pristine marble desk. The silence in the office shifted from a tense standoff to a quiet, brewing storm. I had cornered her. I had stripped away her only defense mechanism, exposing the ugly truth she had spent her entire adult life trying to hide. And when a golden child is finally held accountable for their actions, they do not apologize. They attack. You always were a jealous, vindictive person, Alicia sneered, her voice dropping an octave completely devoid of the frantic panic from moments ago. You have been waiting for this your whole life, have you not? You are sitting there in your fancy little office gloating over my misery just because you finally got lucky with some tech buyout. You think this makes you better than me. You think you can just sit on your millions while your own flesh and blood loses everything. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cool surface of my desk. I am not gloating, Alicia. I am simply stating the facts. Facts that you have spent 32 years actively avoiding. You are not a victim of Connor. You are his perfect match. You both operate on the exact same principle. You take what is not yours, you destroy it, and then you look around for someone else to foot the bill. That is a lie, Alicia snapped, stepping closer to the desk, her face flushing with anger. I have always worked hard for my place in this family. I stayed. I played by Mom and Dad's rules. I went to the church events. I smiled for the cameras. I did everything they asked to keep our image perfect in this community. You were the one who always walked away and caused problems. You owe us this money, Zoya. You owe me. I owe you, I repeated, letting out a short, incredulous laugh that echoed off the glass walls. Let us talk about who owes who, Alicia. Let us talk about the fall of my freshman year of college. Grandpa Theodore left a specific trust fund in my name. It was meant to cover my tuition at Spelman College. But when August rolled around, and I went to the financial aid office to pay my balance, the account was completely empty. Do you remember where that money went? Alicia shifted her weight, crossing her arms defensively. She refused to meet my eyes. That was a family emergency. Mom and Dad made a financial decision to protect us. It was not a family emergency, I corrected her, my voice sharp and unwavering. You decided you wanted a lavish 200-person destination wedding in the Bahamas for your first marriage. The marriage that lasted exactly 8 months before you cheated on him. Mom and Dad drained my college fund to pay for your imported floral arrangements and your custom gown because they could not bear the thought of the church congregation thinking we could not afford a luxury wedding. They told me I had to take out massive student loans because you needed to secure your future. You stole my education to fund a party. You went to college anyway, Alicia muttered, looking away toward the window. You figured it out. You always figure it out. Yes, I figured it out by working 3 jobs while carrying a full course load. I said the decades of suppressed anger, finally giving my words a heavy, lethal weight. But stealing my tuition was not enough for you, was it? When we were in our 20s, you took it a step further. You wanted to maintain your glamorous lifestyle in Buckhead, but you had maxed out all your own credit cards. So you went into my childhood bedroom, took my social security card from my desk drawer, and opened 3 new credit accounts in my name. Alicia swallowed hard, the memory clearly making her uncomfortable, though not out of guilt. She was just annoyed that I was bringing it up and holding it against her. That was a long time ago, Zoya. I was young and stressed. I did not know what I was doing. You were 24 years old, I fired back. You spent $30,000 on designer bags, spa treatments, and luxury vacations, and you let all 3 accounts default. I found out when I was sitting in a leasing office trying to rent my very first apartment. The leasing agent looked at me like I was a criminal and handed me a credit report covered in red flags. I was facing eviction from my college dorm and I had a credit score in the low 400s. I stood up slowly, matching her height, forcing her to look me in the eye. And when I confronted Mom and Dad with the paper trail proving you committed felony identity theft, what did they do? Did they hold you accountable? No. Mom cried and begged me not to file a police report because it would ruin your reputation in the neighborhood. Dad paid off the financial balance so the banks would stop calling, but they left the defaults on my credit history. They let me suffer the consequences of your crime. It took me 7 years to rebuild my credit from the ashes you left behind. 7 years of being denied business loans, paying exorbitant interest rates, and living in rundown neighborhoods because no respectable building would approve my application. Mom and Dad paid it off. Alicia shot back, her voice rising in a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. You did not even have to pay the money back. You are so dramatic, Zoya. You survived. Look at you now. You have this massive office. You are rich. Why are you still holding on to ancient history? Because it is not ancient history, Alicia. It is a deeply ingrained behavioral pattern. I said, walking around the side of my desk until there was nothing between us. You have spent your entire life believing that the rules do not apply to you. You believe that whenever you make a mess, Mom, Dad, or I will quietly clean it up so you can keep pretending to be perfect. You married Connor because he operates the exact same way. He thought he could steal from his own father-in-law and force me to cover the deficit. He thought my 15% equity was just another fund he could drain, just like you drained my college account. Alicia backed up a step, her shoulders hitting the heavy glass door of the office. Her false bravado was crumbling again, replaced by a genuine, terrifying realization that her usual manipulation tactics were completely useless. Zoya, please. If Connor goes down for this fraud, I go down with him. I will go to prison. You cannot let them send me to a federal prison. We are blood. You should have thought about our bloodline before you signed your name on fraudulent corporate documents, I replied, my voice chillingly calm. You should have thought about family loyalty before you sat at that restaurant table last night, recording me on your phone waiting to laugh at my destruction. You wanted to see me ruined, Alicia. You wanted me legally disowned so you could feast on the scraps of my inheritance without having to share. I reached out to my desk and pressed the button on my intercom. Sarah, please send security up to my office right now. We have a visitor who is ready to leave the building. No, Zoya. Wait, Alicia pleaded, her hands grabbing frantically at the sleeves of her expensive coat. You have $8 million. Just give me a fraction of it. It will not even make a dent in your bank account. You can save me. I could save you, I agreed, looking at her with total indifference. But I will not. The Bank of Zoya is officially and permanently closed. I am not your safety net anymore. I am not Mom and Dad's human shield. You are 32 years old. It is time you finally paid your own debts. The elevator bell chimed in the distance, followed by the heavy footsteps of my building security team approaching the glass doors. Alicia looked at me, her face contorted with a mixture of profound hatred and absolute terror. The reality of her situation had finally broken through her lifelong delusion. There was no one left to write a check. There was no one left to take the blame. For the first time in her life, she was entirely on her own. The heavy glass doors of my office swung open before Alicia could utter another word. Two towering security guards stepped into the room, their expressions completely unreadable. My assistant Sarah stood firmly right behind them, her arms crossed tight across her chest. She pointed directly at Alicia. "Ma'am, it is time for you to leave." The taller guard said, his voice a low, authoritative rumble that left no room for negotiation. Alicia flinched, stepping away from the glass door as if she had been burned. For a fraction of a second, I saw genuine humiliation wash over her face. In all her 32 years, she had never been treated like a trespasser. She had always been the honored guest, the VIP, the woman who glided past velvet ropes on the strength of our parents' last name. Now she was being escorted out of an office building like a common threat, but the humiliation quickly curdled into a rabid, desperate fury. As one of the guards reached out to lightly grasp her elbow, she violently jerked her arm away. "Do not touch me!" Alicia shrieked, her voice echoing painfully off the polished marble walls. "I know the way out. I do not need your hands on me." She hastily grabbed her designer handbag from my desk, her perfectly manicured fingernails scraping aggressively against the stone surface. She took 3 steps toward the door, then stopped abruptly. She spun around to face me, her eyes burning with a toxic mixture of hatred and panic. If she was going down, she was determined to drag me into the flames with her. "You really think this is over, Zoya?" She spat, her chest heaving. "You think because you sit in this fancy glass box and have Vanguard backing you that you are untouchable. You are forgetting who you are dealing with. You are forgetting who holds the real power in our city." I remained seated, my face completely impassive. "I am dealing with a desperate woman facing a federal indictment," I replied smoothly. "And there is no power in that, Alicia. There is only a countdown to your inevitable collapse." A wicked, frantic smile twisted Alicia's lips. "We will see about that. You think Mom and Dad are just going to roll over and accept this bankruptcy? You think they are going to let you walk away with $8 million while they lose everything? You do not know our mother at all. Right now, Mom is on the phone with Bishop Davis. That statement made the air in the room shift slightly. I did not move a muscle, but internally a red warning light began to flash. In our affluent African American community in Atlanta, our church was not just a place of spiritual worship. It was the absolute epicenter of social, political, and financial influence. The congregation was filled with city council members, real estate developers, and local media executives. Bishop Davis was a kingmaker in the city, and for the last 3 decades, my mother had meticulously positioned herself as the crown jewel of the church's social hierarchy. She directed the choir, organized the charity drives, and hosted the most exclusive Bible study groups in her living room. Alicia saw the slight tightening of my jaw, and her smile grew wider, feeding off the tiny crack in my armor. That is right, Zoya. We are going to the bishop. We are going to the church elders, the deacons, and the entire congregation. And we are going to tell them exactly how you built this little tech empire of yours. She took a step closer, completely ignoring the security guards who were now moving in to physically restrain her. We are going to tell everyone that you stole your seed money from the family firm. We will say you secretly siphoned funds from mom and dad's accounts for years to build your software. And now that you hit the jackpot, you forged a disownment letter to leave your elderly parents destitute and homeless. We will tell them you are an abusive, greedy, godless daughter who betrayed her own blood for corporate greed. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking even for her. It was a perfectly constructed smear campaign designed to hit every single emotional trigger of a tight-knit religious community. No one will believe you, I said, though my voice lacked the absolute certainty it held 5 minutes ago. I have the financial records. Vanguard has the audit. The truth is in the data. Data does not matter when a mother is crying on the church altar. Zoya. Alicia countered, her voice ringing with vicious triumph. You know how Mom cries. You know how she can make anyone believe she is a martyr. By Sunday morning, there will not be a single person in Atlanta who will do business with you. They will protest outside this very building. They will call Vanguard and demand they drop a predator from their executive board. We will make you so toxic that your precious $8 million will not be able to buy you a cup of coffee in this town. You want to ruin my life. Fine. But I promise you I will make sure your name is dirt before I go down. The guards had finally had enough. The taller one stepped forward, firmly gripping Alicia by the upper arm, while the other moved to her opposite side. Let go of me, she screamed, thrashing against their grip as they physically turned her toward the glass doors. I am leaving. I am leaving. They marched her out of my office and into the bustling hallway. My employees, who had been trying to politely ignore the commotion, were now openly staring as my sister was forcibly dragged toward the elevators. Alicia did not care about the audience. She kept her head turned over her shoulder, her eyes locked onto mine through the glass walls of my office. You are going to burn Zoya, she shrieked as the elevator doors slid open. Mom is going to destroy you. You hear me? You are going to lose everything. The metal door slid shut, cutting off her hysterical screaming and leaving my office floor in a stunned, heavy silence. Sarah cautiously stepped back into my office, looking incredibly shaken. She closed the glass door behind her and walked over to my desk. Zoya, she asked softly, her professional demeanor cracking slightly with genuine concern. Are you okay? Should I call our corporate PR firm and give them a heads up about a potential defamation issue? I looked away from the empty doorway and stared out the window at the sprawling city skyline. The morning sun suddenly felt a lot less warm. Alicia was a liar, a thief, and a coward, but she was not bluffing about this. My mother was a master manipulator who treated public perception like a weapon of mass destruction. If Evelyn went to Bishop Davis with a fabricated story of elder abuse and financial theft, the resulting scandal would be catastrophic. The congregation would rally behind her blindly. The local news would pick it up as a sensational story of corporate greed tearing a prominent Black family apart. Vanguard Holdings was a conservative, risk-averse conglomerate. They had just paid $8 million for a clean acquisition. If they suddenly found themselves dragged into a messy public family scandal involving stolen funds, they would not hesitate to freeze my payout and place me on indefinite leave pending an investigation. My family had realized they could not beat me in a boardroom, so they were moving the war to the one battlefield they completely controlled. They were going to weaponize the church. I turned back to Sarah, my mind rapidly shifting gears from defense to offense. I could not sit back and let them control the narrative. I had to strike before they even had the chance to light the match. "Do not call PR just yet, Sarah," I instructed, my voice sharp and decisive. "I need you to do two things for me immediately. First, call Desmond. Tell him I need an emergency meeting with him in 1 hour. Tell him to bring his entire legal team. And second, I need you to find out the exact date and location of the church annual community charity gala." Sarah quickly pulled out her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. "I am on it. But Zoya, what are you planning to do?" I picked up my pen, the same one I had used to sign my life away the night before, and tapped it thoughtfully against the marble desk. "They want to put on a show for the congregation," I said quietly. "Fine. But if they want a public spectacle, I am going to make sure I am the one writing the script." I left the office just after 7 that evening. The sky over Atlanta had turned a deep bruised purple, perfectly matching the heavy exhaustion settling into my bones. I drove my modest sedan back to my apartment complex in Midtown, a stark contrast to the sprawling gated mansions my parents and sister occupied in Buckhead. I had deliberately chosen this quiet, unassuming building 5 years ago to keep my overhead low while I bootstrapped my company. Tonight, the familiar brick facade felt less like a sanctuary and more like a bunker. I walked through the brightly lit lobby, exchanged a tired nod with the night concierge, and rode the elevator up to the 4th floor. I unlocked my door, dropped my keys onto the entryway console, and kicked off my heels. The silence of my apartment was usually comforting, but tonight it felt tense, thick with the anticipation of the next attack. I knew my mother was currently orchestrating her church smear campaign, plotting to ruin my reputation with the congregation. But I also knew Connor was not the type of man to just sit back and let his mother-in-law fight his battles. He was a corporate predator. His ego had been brutally shattered in that private dining room, and men like Connor did not handle humiliation well. He was going to strike back, and he was going to use the only weapon he truly understood. I had just poured myself a glass of water and walked into the kitchen when a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through my living room. I froze the glass halfway to my lips. I was not expecting company. My lawyer Desmond was currently at his own firm reviewing the Vanguard acquisition documents and compiling the embezzlement evidence I had gathered against my family. My assistant Sarah was already home for the night. I set the glass down on the granite counter and walked quietly toward the front door. I leaned forward and checked the peephole. Standing in the hallway was a man I did not recognize. He was wearing a nondescript gray suit and holding a thick brown manila envelope tucked tightly under his arm. He looked bored, shifting his weight impatiently from one foot to the other. I opened the door just a few inches, keeping the heavy brass security chain engaged. "Yes," I asked, my voice tight with suspicion. The man looked down at a clipboard in his hand. "Are you Zoya?" he asked, his tone completely flat. "Yes, that is me." The man did not smile. He did not introduce himself. He simply slid the thick brown envelope through the narrow gap in the door and let it drop heavily onto my entryway rug. "You have been served," he said. He turned on his heel and walked toward the elevator without another word. I stood there for a moment, listening to his footsteps fade down the carpeted hallway. I unlatched the chain, picked up the heavy envelope, and locked the door securely behind me. My heart was suddenly hammering against my ribs, a cold rush of adrenaline flooding my system. I walked over to my living room sofa, sat down, and tore open the adhesive flap. Inside was a massive stack of legal documents printed on thick paper and bound with a blue legal cover. The header at the top of the very first page was stamped with the official logo of Connor's prestigious corporate law firm. Below that, printed in bold, uncompromising letters, were the words "Emergency Injunction" and "Cease and Desist Order." I started reading, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon with practiced speed. Connor had not just filed a standard lawsuit. He had filed a declaration of absolute war. He was petitioning the Fulton County Superior Court to place an immediate hard freeze on the $8 million Vanguard acquisition payout. His justification was a masterclass in legal fiction and sheer unadulterated audacity. He was officially claiming that Zoya Supply Chain Solutions was not an independent entity, but a derivative asset of my parents' real estate firm. He alleged that I had utilized family financial resources as the primary seed capital to launch my tech platform, meaning the family firm was legally entitled to a controlling share of the Vanguard buyout. I flipped to the exhibit index at the back of the packet to see what on earth he was using as proof of this supposed seed capital. I expected to see forged bank transfers or fabricated loan documents. Instead, Exhibit A was a photocopy of a canceled check from exactly 10 years ago. It was a check for $2,000 written out to me by my late grandmother Estelle. I stared at the grainy photocopy, a sudden wave of nausea washing over me. Grandmother Estelle had given me that money to help pay for my college textbooks and a refurbished laptop during my senior year at Spelman. She gave it to me right after my parents had completely drained my college trust fund to pay for Alicia's lavish destination wedding. It was a deeply personal, loving gift from the only family member who had ever truly seen my potential and wanted to protect me. Connor had dug through a decade of archival family bank records, found that single beautiful gesture of love, and creatively reclassified it as an initial corporate investment from the family estate. He was arguing that because grandmother Estelle's money was technically family wealth, my entire software empire was built on family resources. It was entirely frivolous. It was a desperate, laughable stretch that any competent judge would eventually throw out of court. But as I let the heavy stack of documents drop onto the coffee table, the terrifying reality of his strategy washed over me. Connor did not need to win the lawsuit. He just needed to create enough legal chaos to terrify Vanguard Holdings. Major global conglomerates hated messy public litigation. They were highly risk-averse. They had agreed to pay $8 million for a clean, unencumbered software platform. If a massive emergency injunction suddenly hit the public record, claiming that the intellectual property was built on stolen family funds, Vanguard would instantly pull the emergency brake. They would freeze the $8 million in escrow. They would launch a grueling 6-month internal investigation to protect their own corporate liabilities. And during those 6 months, my company would be completely paralyzed. I would not receive my payout. I would not be able to pay my employees. I would not be able to scale the servers or maintain my client contracts. My entire business would suffocate under the weight of the frozen assets. Connor was weaponizing his immense privilege and his legal expertise to enact a sophisticated form of financial violence against me. He knew he could not outsmart me in the boardroom, so he was using the slow, grinding machinery of the justice system to starve me out. He wanted to drain my resources and force me to my knees, hoping I would eventually surrender the Vanguard money, just to make the agonizing legal nightmare end. He wanted me to call him begging for a settlement. I leaned back against the sofa cushions and closed my eyes. The gloating smirk on his face from the restaurant flashed vividly in my mind. He thought he had outmaneuvered me. He thought this injunction was the final nail in my coffin, a brilliant trap that I could not escape. I took a deep, shaky breath, letting the initial wave of panic subside. Connor was smart, but he was blinded by his own arrogance. He assumed I would fight this battle exactly the way he wanted me to fight it, drowning in paperwork and defensive court filings. He did not realize that I had no intention of playing defense. I reached for my phone on the cushion next to me and dialed my lawyer. It was time to stop reacting to their attacks and start dismantling their entire foundation. By 8 o'clock the next morning, I was sitting across from Desmond inside his expansive downtown office. Desmond was not just my legal counsel. He was a mentor, a surrogate father figure, and one of the most formidable legal minds in the state of Georgia. He was a 60-year-old African-American man who had built his practice from the ground up fighting through the prejudices of the Southern legal system to establish a firm that commanded absolute respect across the entire Eastern Seaboard. Desmond was the man who helped me incorporate my business 5 years ago, when I had nothing but a refurbished laptop and a vision. He saw the potential in me that my own father had deliberately ignored. Unlike Connor, who relied on his firm's inherited legacy and aggressive empty posturing, Desmond relied on an encyclopedic knowledge of the law and a strategic brilliance that bordered on terrifying. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his reading glasses perched near the end of his nose, meticulously reviewing the heavy stack of documents the process server had dropped at my door the night before. The morning sunlight illuminated the deep lines of concentration on his face. I sat completely still in the leather guest chair, nursing a cup of black tea that had long since gone cold, waiting for his final verdict. Desmond sighed, took off his glasses, and tossed them onto the desk. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his index finger thoughtfully against the armrest. "He is a parasite," Desmond said, his deep baritone voice rumbling with quiet professional disgust. "A very clever, highly educated parasite." I leaned forward, resting my hands on my knees. Can he actually do this? Can he legally freeze an $8 million acquisition over a $2,000 check my grandmother gave me for college textbooks a decade ago? Desmond folded his hands in his lap, his expression serious. In a fair world, a judge would laugh him out of the courtroom by lunch. The statute of limitations, the nature of a personal familial gift, the absolute lack of any written equity agreement from 10 years ago, it is all entirely in your favor. If we take this injunction to trial, we win. There is absolutely no question about that, Zoya. But you need to understand the game he is playing. Connor does not want to take this to trial. He wants to leverage the sheer weight of the justice system to put a chokehold on your cash flow. Desmond stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the bustling Atlanta streets. He is filing for an emergency ex parte injunction. He is aggressively arguing that the Vanguard payout must be frozen immediately in a court-appointed escrow account to prevent the dissipation of what he is loosely defining as contested family assets. Vanguard Holdings is a massive publicly traded conglomerate. They answer to a board of directors and a legion of shareholders. When their corporate legal department gets wind that their $8 million acquisition is suddenly the subject of a bitter, publicized ownership dispute, they are going to panic. I felt a cold knot tighten in the pit of my stomach. What exactly does that mean for the deal? It means Vanguard will pull the emergency brake, Desmond stated plainly, turning back to face me. Corporate conglomerates hate messy litigation. It makes them highly risk-averse. They will invoke the material adverse change clause in your acquisition contract. They will halt the final transfer of funds and place the entire merger under a grueling 6-month internal review just to protect their own corporate liabilities. And they might even look for a loophole to back out of the deal entirely just to avoid the bad press associated with a stolen funds scandal. The reality of his words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. If Vanguard froze the payout, my company would be stranded in a financial no-man's land. I had already signed the transition agreements. I had authorized the scaling of our cloud servers, upgraded our enterprise software licenses, and approved the hiring of 50 new developers based on the capital injection that was supposed to hit my accounts next week. I had financially committed to the expansion. Without that Vanguard money, I would not be able to make payroll by the end of the month. My startup, the company I had poured my blood, sweat, and tears into for 5 agonizing years, would bleed to death in a matter of weeks. The empire I built would collapse before it ever truly took off. Connor knows exactly what he is doing. Desmond continued, walking back to his desk. He is watching the clock. He knows you need that liquidity to sustain your operations and finalize the merger. His strategy is extortion, plain and simple. He wants to starve you out until you are so desperate to save your life's work that you agree to a private settlement. He is banking on the fact that writing him a check for $2 million to make the lawsuit disappear will suddenly sound a lot better than losing the entire $8 million deal and your business along with it. I looked down at my hands. They were perfectly steady, but inside, a massive paradigm shift was occurring. Up until this very moment, my entire strategy regarding my family had been defensive. I had built my life in the shadows, quietly succeeding, so I could eventually walk away from them without needing their permission or approval. Even at the restaurant the night before, my goal was simply to reveal my success, sever the legal ties, and leave them behind. I had foolishly believed that if I proved I was financially untouchable, they would finally leave me alone. But I was wrong. You cannot simply walk away from people like Connor, Alicia, and my parents. They view independence as a profound threat and personal boundaries as a challenge to be conquered. As long as they possessed a single shred of social or financial power, they would use it to try and drag me back down to their level so they could continue to step on me. Ignoring them was no longer an option. Surviving was no longer enough. If I wanted to keep my company and my freedom, I had to completely eradicate their ability to hurt me. "I am not settling with him, Desmond," I said, lifting my head. My voice hardened into something cold, sharp, and absolute. "I am not giving that man a single dime of my grandmother's money, and I am certainly not paying a ransom for my own company. If I pay him to go away, he will just come back the next time he ruins an investment. My mother is already planning to destroy my reputation at our church to force my hand from the social angle. They are trying to surround me and crush me into submission." Desmond sat down, a sharp, predatory glint appearing in his dark eyes. He recognized the shift in my demeanor. "Then we do not play defense," he said simply. "What is your move, Zoya?" I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a heavy encrypted hard drive. It contained the massive cache of due diligence files Vanguard had compiled on my parents' real estate firm during my background check. I set the drive carefully on Desmond's polished desk. "Connor filed an injunction based on a fabricated legal premise," I explained. "He is relying on the illusion that his firm is a legitimate, functioning corporate entity that has been victimized by a rogue family member. But we both know his firm is a house of cards drowning in fraudulent offshore debt." I looked directly at my mentor, feeling a ruthless clarity wash over me. "I do not just want to quash this injunction, Desmond. I want to systematically dismantle their entire operation. I want to shatter their leverage so completely that Connor loses his law license and my parents lose their untouchable standing in this city. I need your forensic accounting team. I need them to tear through every single tax return, every ledger, and every corporate filing Connor has touched in the last 3 years. If he is desperate enough to forge a lawsuit against me to get his hands on my money, he was arrogant enough to make a fatal mistake somewhere else. We are going to find the fatal flaw in his armor. And then, we are going to burn his firm to the ground." Desmond picked up the hard drive, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "I will assemble the team immediately. We will have every file decrypted and analyzed by midnight. But Zoya, if we find the smoking gun, how do you want to deliver it? A quiet submission to the state bar. A tip to the district attorney." I thought about my mother's threat. I thought about the church congregation she planned to weaponize against me to ruin my name. Neither I replied, standing up from my chair and buttoning my blazer. They want a public spectacle. They want to use the community to shame me into submission, so we are going to give them exactly what they asked for. I just need you to find the evidence. I will handle the execution. I did not leave Desmond's office building that morning. Instead, I moved into one of his glass-walled conference rooms on the 42nd floor, claiming it as my temporary war room. His paralegals brought in boxes of printed corporate filings, while I set up my encrypted laptop at the head of the long oak table. Desmond's forensic accounting team was already diving into the digital breadcrumbs of Connor's shadow shell companies, hunting for the missing capital. But while they tracked the money I needed to focus on the immediate weapon pointed directly at my head, the emergency injunction. I have spent the last 5 years writing complex code debugging supply chain software and hunting down microscopic errors in massive databases. My brain is fundamentally wired to find the anomaly. I took the thick blue-bound packet Connor had served me and began to dissect it page by page. I did not just read his legal arguments. I read the margins. I checked the timestamps, the jurisdictional headers, and the formatting of the citations. Connor was a partner at a highly prestigious firm. His legal arguments were polished, aggressive, and layered with intimidating precedents. But extreme arrogance always breeds sloppiness. Men like Connor navigate the world believing they are completely untouchable, which makes them assume they can skip the fundamental details without consequence. Hour after hour passed. The sun climbed high over the Atlanta skyline and began its slow descent, casting long golden shadows across the conference table. My eyes were burning from staring at the dense legal typography, but I refused to take a break. Finally, I reached the section at the very back of the packet containing the sworn affidavits. This was the supposed factual backbone of his entire lawsuit. There were 3 affidavits in total. One from Connor, one from my mother Evelyn, and one from my father Thomas. I slid my father's document out from the stack and laid it flat under the harsh glare of the fluorescent desk lamp. The document was a sworn statement declaring under penalty of perjury that the $2,000 given to me by my grandmother was definitively a corporate disbursement from the family real estate trust. I skimmed past the absurd lies and focused my attention on the bottom of the page, the signature line. I stared at the dark blue ink. My father had a very distinct signature. It was an imposing, aggressive scrawl with sharp angles, a byproduct of signing thousands of real estate contracts over 3 decades. The signature on this page looked correct at first glance. The heavy cross of the letter T was there. The loop of the H was present. But as I leaned in closer, studying the ink distribution, I realized it lacked the natural fluid pressure of a man quickly signing his own name. It looked hesitant. It looked drawn. It looked perfectly, painstakingly traced. I narrowed my eyes and looked at the handwritten date directly next to the signature. It was dated just 2 days ago, Tuesday the 14th. My mind immediately snagged on that specific date, Tuesday the 14th. I pulled my personal cell phone out of my pocket and opened my social media application. My mother Evelyn treated her social media accounts like a daily public relations broadcast for our family. She meticulously documented every vacation, every luxury purchase, and every social achievement to ensure the church congregation knew exactly how blessed and prosperous they were. I scrolled quickly down her timeline to the posts from earlier this week. It only took me 30 seconds to find exactly what I was looking for. There it was. A pristine, heavily filtered photo of my father standing on a lush green fairway, holding a golf club and smoking a Cuban cigar. The caption below it read, "Thomas enjoying his annual executive golf retreat in Hilton Head. So blessed to have a hard-working husband taking some well-deserved rest." The location tag was prominently pinned in South Carolina. The timestamp confirmed the photo was uploaded on the morning of the 14th. He had been at the resort all week. I looked back down at the affidavit. To file a sworn legal declaration in the state of Georgia, the document must be signed in the physical presence of a registered and licensed notary public. I looked closely at the crimped notary stamp pressed into the bottom corner of the page. The stamp belonged to a junior paralegal employed directly by Connor's law firm in downtown Atlanta. My father was nearly 300 miles away in South Carolina on the exact day this document was supposedly signed and notarized in Fulton County. He could not have physically held the pen. The reality of what had happened clicked into place with breathtaking clarity. When the Vanguard press release hit the financial news networks early yesterday morning, Connor had panicked. He knew he needed to file the emergency injunction immediately to freeze my $8 million payout before the wire transfer cleared my accounts. He desperately needed my father's sworn statement to validate the fabricated claim regarding family resources. But my father was out of state, completely unreachable while playing an 18-hole course. Connor could not afford to wait for him to fly back to Atlanta. The timeline was far too tight. So, operating under the deep delusion of his own absolute impunity, Connor forged his own father-in-law's signature on a legal document. He then either intimidated or bribed a junior paralegal at his firm to illegally stamp it, completely confident that no one would ever dare to question the paperwork of a senior partner. I grabbed the affidavit and my cell phone, pushed my chair back, and walked briskly down the carpeted hallway to Desmond's corner office. He was on a conference call, but when he saw the fierce, triumphant expression on my face, he immediately held up a finger and ended the conversation. I walked over to his desk. I placed the forged affidavit right in front of him, followed immediately by my phone displaying my mother's social media post. "Look at the date on the signature, and then look at the location tag on my mother's photo," I said, my voice vibrating with a quiet, lethal energy. Desmond pushed his reading glasses up the bridge of his nose. He leaned forward and looked at the legal document. Then he looked at the bright screen of my phone. He looked back at the document. A slow, deep, incredulous laugh escaped his chest, echoing loudly in the quiet office. "He forged it," Desmond said, leaning back in his heavy leather chair and shaking his head. "He actually forged a sworn affidavit and submitted it to the Superior Court." "Yes," I confirmed, planting my hands firmly on his desk. "My father was in Hilton Head all week. Connor panicked when he saw my press release and signed it himself to expedite the injunction." "Desmond, what is the exact legal penalty for this?" Desmond took off his glasses, his eyes shining with the brilliant thrill of a guaranteed victory. "Submitting a forged affidavit to a judge is fraud upon the court. It is aggravated perjury. The notary who stamped this will instantly lose their commission and face serious criminal charges for falsifying a legal seal. As for Connor, he is looking at immediate and permanent disbarment, the total collapse of his legal career, and a very real possibility of serving a significant sentence in a federal penitentiary." Desmond stood up, picking up the affidavit as if he were holding a winning lottery ticket. "Zoya, this is not just a minor flaw in his argument. This is a self-inflicted gunshot wound to his entire professional life. This injunction is completely legally dead. He handed you the exact weapon you need to destroy him." I looked at the forged signature, feeling a profound sense of vindication wash over me. Connor thought he could use the law to suffocate me. Instead, he had just handed me the rope he would hang himself with. "Good," I replied, my tone icy and resolute. "Have your team draft the motion to dismiss and prepare to notify the state bar. But we are not finished here, Desmond. This takes care of Connor, but I still need the ammunition to take care of my parents. I need to know exactly how they are hiding their debts." Just as the words left my mouth, Desmond's office door swung open. The head of his forensic accounting team stepped into the room holding a thick red binder. He looked directly at me, his expression deadly serious. "We found it," the accountant said. "We cracked the offshore ledgers. You are going to want to see this immediately. It is much worse than just bad real estate investments." I stepped away from Desmond's desk and walked over to the long oak conference table where the head of the forensic accounting team was standing. He placed the thick red binder down on the polished wood and flipped it open to a center page. The document inside was a complex color-coded financial flowchart that mapped the movement of millions of dollars over the last 14 months. I leaned over the table, my eyes rapidly scanning the columns of numbers, dates, and routing codes. Elias, the lead accountant, pointed his pen at a specific cluster of offshore shell companies. "These are the shadow accounts Connor set up under your sister Alicia's name." Elias explained, his voice low and incredibly serious. "We originally assumed Connor was simply funneling liquid capital out of your father's real estate firm to hide it from creditors. But when we dug deeper into the transaction histories, we realized the flow of money was actually moving in the opposite direction." I frowned, tracing the red lines on the paper with my finger. "What do you mean? If the family firm was going bankrupt, where were these shadow accounts getting the money to funnel back into the business?" Elias tapped the very top of the flowchart. "That is the bombshell, Zoya. The real estate firm was bleeding out rapidly. Connor's disastrous commercial investments had triggered a cascade of margin calls from their lenders. To stop the banks from foreclosing months ago, they desperately needed a massive immediate injection of liquid capital. But no legitimate bank would approve a bridge loan for a company that deep in the red, so they found their own capital." He slid a secondary document across the table. It was a printed ledger of wire transfers originating from a domestic bank account right here in Atlanta. The money flowed from this domestic account, bounced through the offshore entities under Alicia's name to scrub the origin, and was then quietly deposited into your father's corporate accounts to pay the commercial mortgages. We are talking about nearly $3 million in unauthorized transfers. I looked at the domestic account information. The name of the account holder was redacted by the bank, but the 9-digit federal tax identification number was clearly printed at the top of the page. My mind, trained to process and categorize raw data, immediately recognized the format. It was not a corporate tax ID. It was the specific numerical format assigned to registered charitable organizations. I pulled my encrypted laptop toward me and opened a new browser window. I navigated directly to the public database of the Internal Revenue Service. I typed the 9-digit number from the ledger into the search bar for registered charities in the state of Georgia and hit enter. The page loaded instantly. I stared at the screen, the blood running completely cold in my veins. The name of the registered entity flashed in bold black letters. It was the Genesis Community Outreach and Development Fund. It was the charity fund for our church. The heavy silence in the conference room was deafening. Desmond walked over to the table and looked over my shoulder at the glowing laptop screen. The sheer magnitude of the crime settled over us like a suffocating blanket. My parents had not just defrauded a corporate bank. They had not just made a bad business deal. They had systematically stolen millions of dollars from their own congregation. The money in that fund was raised by hard-working families, elderly pensioners, and local small businesses. It was meant to build affordable housing initiatives, fund youth mentoring programs, and support community relief efforts in our city. Instead, it had been secretly drained to maintain the illusion of my parents' massive wealth. I sank into the chair behind me, piecing the entire timeline together in my mind. Suddenly, my mother's desperate pivot this morning made terrifying sense. Her threat to go to Bishop Davis and weaponize the congregation against me was not just an act of spiteful vengeance. It was a highly calculated preemptive strike. She knew that Vanguard would eventually audit the family firm, and she knew the missing church funds would be discovered. If she could convince the bishop and the entire congregation that I was a vindictive, lying, abusive daughter who stole from her own family, it would completely discredit any financial evidence I tried to bring forward. She was trying to destroy my credibility, so that when the embezzlement came to light, she could frame me as the mastermind who hacked their accounts and stole the church money to fund my startup. They were going to frame me for their felony. Connor had drafted the shell companies and facilitated the laundering. My father Thomas had authorized the fraudulent transfers to save his failing empire. My mother Evelyn, who sat on the church financial planning committee, had manipulated the internal ledgers to hide the missing funds from the bishop. And Alicia had willingly signed her name to the offshore accounts holding the stolen money. The four of them were a criminal syndicate hiding behind designer clothes, expensive cars, and front-row pews on Sunday morning. Zoya, Desmond said softly, placing a steady hand on my shoulder. This elevates the situation entirely out of civil litigation. This is federal wire fraud, aggravated embezzlement, and tax evasion. If we hand this red binder over to the district attorney or the state tax board, your parents and Connor are looking at decades in a federal penitentiary. The fallout will be catastrophic. I looked away from the screen and stared blankly at the far wall of the conference room. For 35 years, they had demanded absolute perfection from me. They had judged my every move, criticized my appearance, and told me I was a disgrace to the family name because I chose to build my own life instead of serving theirs. They had demanded respectability while operating with absolute moral bankruptcy. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone. I did not feel fear. I did not feel panic. I felt a profound, absolute, and chilling calm. I unlocked the screen and dialed my assistant, Sarah. She answered on the first ring. Sarah. I need a piece of information immediately, I said, my voice echoing with a hard, relentless authority. Tell me the exact date and location of the church annual community charity gala. I hear her typing rapidly on her keyboard. It is this coming Saturday night, Zoya. It is being held at the Grand Ballroom of the Plaza Hotel downtown. The agenda says your father Thomas is scheduled to receive the Businessman of the Year award at 8 o'clock. Perfect, I replied, my eyes locking onto the red binder on the table. I want you to contact the event organizers right now. I want you to purchase the Platinum Sponsor Package. Buy the largest VIP table available and make absolutely sure it is positioned in the front row directly next to the main podium. I do not care if they say the event is sold out. Offer them triple the asking price. Make a corporate donation from my company account to secure that table under my name. Consider it done, Sarah confirmed without hesitation. Do you need me to arrange security for the evening? Yes. Hire a private security detail to escort me to the table and stand by the exits I instructed. But do not tell anyone else about this. I hung up the phone and placed it flat on the table next to the forged affidavit and the offshore ledgers. My family wanted to put on a show for the congregation. They wanted to use our community as a weapon to destroy my life and protect their lies. They were relying on the assumption that I would quietly fight them in a courtroom while they controlled the public narrative. I looked up at Desmond. His eyes were wide, realizing exactly what I was about to do. We are not going to the district attorney just yet, Desmond, I said, tapping my fingers against the cover of the red binder. If I hand this to the police behind closed doors, my mother will just spin it as a misunderstanding and play the victim for the church. She will manipulate the congregation into paying for their legal defense. If we want to stop them permanently, we have to cut off their power at the source. We have to shatter their pristine image in front of the exact people they stole from. I stood up, buttoning my blazer, the weight of the upcoming battle settling firmly onto my shoulders. Prepare a summary report of this audit, Desmond. Make it clean, easy to read, and undeniable. Print it on heavy stock paper and seal it in a professional binder. On Saturday night, I am going to attend the charity gala. And right after my father accepts his award for being the greatest businessman in the city, I am going to hand-deliver the truth directly to the bishop. Saturday evening arrived with a crisp electric chill in the Atlanta air. I stepped out of the sleek black town car and looked up at the towering historic facade of the Plaza Hotel. The grand entrance was bathed in golden light, bustling with valets rushing to park a parade of luxury vehicles. This was the absolute pinnacle of Atlanta high society. For years, I had only ever attended these events as an afterthought squeezed into the back of my parents' town car, wearing whatever muted conservative dress my mother deemed appropriate, so I would not accidentally outshine my sister. Tonight, I was the main event, even if no one else in the building knew it yet. I smoothed the skirt of my emerald green designer gown. It was a masterpiece of silk and structured elegance tailored flawlessly to my frame with a dramatic, sweeping train that commanded attention. I paired it with minimal jewelry, letting the sheer confidence of my posture make the loudest statement. Behind me, two massive men in tailored dark suits stepped out of a trailing SUV. My private security detail. I carried a sleek black leather clutch, and tucked safely inside was a silver flash drive containing the digital copies of the audit. My lead security guard carried a slim, locked briefcase holding the physical red binder Desmond had prepared. I walked through the revolving brass doors and stepped into the grand foyer. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume roasted prime rib and the quiet buzzing hum of immense wealth. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a brilliant warm glow over the hundreds of guests, mingling in their tailored tuxedos and glittering ball gowns. These were the elite members of the Genesis Community Outreach Congregation. Politicians, judges, local media executives, and corporate titans. The very people my parents had spent a lifetime trying to impress. The very people my parents were secretly robbing blind to pay for their country club memberships and offshore bank accounts. I had barely taken 10 steps across the polished marble floor when I saw them. My mother Evelyn was draped in a silver sequined gown that caught every flicker of light in the room. A massive, ostentatious diamond necklace rested heavily against her collarbone. She was holding court with a group of city council members near the coat check, throwing her head back in a practiced musical laugh that I knew was completely fake. My father Thomas stood right beside her in a bespoke tuxedo, projecting the perfect image of the benevolent, successful patriarch. He was the man of the hour, scheduled to accept the Businessman of the Year award in less than 2 hours. He turned his head to survey his kingdom, and his eyes locked directly onto mine. His practiced charming smile instantly vanished, replaced by a flash of pure, unfiltered panic. He leaned over, whispering sharply into my mother's ear. Evelyn turned her eyes, widening in absolute shock as she took in my appearance. She hastily excused herself from the council members, her fake smile straining at the edges. The two of them began marching rapidly across the foyer toward me, moving with an aggressive, panicked urgency designed to intercept me before I could reach the main ballroom doors. They looked like two predators moving in for a quiet, desperate kill. I stopped right in the center of the lobby, motioning for my security detail to hang back just a few feet. I wanted my parents to feel brave enough to say exactly what was on their minds without realizing they were already surrounded. "What in the world do you think you are doing here?" my mother hissed, coming to an abrupt halt just inches from my face. She kept her rigid, frozen smile plastered on her lips for the benefit of the surrounding crowd, but her eyes were venomous and wild. "You were not invited to this gala, Zoya. This is a private, ticketed event for the highest tiers of the congregation. You need to turn around and walk right back out those doors before I have the event coordinators throw you out onto the street like a common trespasser." I looked down at her, maintaining an expression of complete, terrifying boredom. "I do not need an invitation, Mother. I bought a ticket." My father stepped forward, using his large frame to try and physically block my path. He lowered his voice to a menacing, gravelly whisper, leaning in so close I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "You are completely out of your depth, little girl. You think because you have a little tech buyout on the horizon that you can play in the big leagues." Connor filed that emergency injunction on Thursday. "By Monday morning, your entire company is going to be frozen in escrow. You are going to be bankrupt, and you will be begging me for a loan just to keep your servers running." He pointed a thick finger at my face, his arrogance completely blinding him to the danger he was in. "Do not come here tonight trying to embarrass me on the most important night of my career. This is my night. I am being honored by the entire city for my contributions to this community. You are a disgrace to this family, and you do not belong in this room." "Your father is right," Evelyn whispered harshly, her fingers twitching as if she desperately wanted to grab my arm and physically drag me out of the hotel. "I have already spoken to the bishop. I laid the groundwork just like Alicia warned you I would. If you cause a scene tonight, the entire congregation will know what a greedy, manipulative child you are. We will ruin your reputation so thoroughly that Vanguard will drop your contract before the sun comes up. Now leave. Go back to your cheap apartment, keep your mouth shut, and wait for your lawyers to call you." They were so incredibly predictable. They were still relying on the exact same tired tactics of intimidation and public shaming that had worked on me when I was a frightened teenager. They truly believed they held all the power because they controlled the social narrative of the church. They had absolutely no idea that their entire financial and legal empire was currently sitting in a locked briefcase 2 feet behind me. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I did not offer a single word of defense. I simply reached into my black leather clutch and pulled out a heavy gold-embossed card. It was not a standard paper entry ticket. It was a solid metal card reserved exclusively for the highest tier of donors. I held the gold card up just high enough for both of them to see the word platinum engraved across the top. "Actually, Dad, I do belong in this room," I said, my voice smooth and chillingly calm, cutting through his bravado like a knife. "In fact, considering I just wrote a massive corporate check to sponsor this entire evening, I practically own this room. And as for your award, I would highly suggest you enjoy every single second of your grand acceptance speech tonight." I leaned in slightly, locking eyes with the man who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless. "Because it is going to be the very last time anyone in this city ever claps for you." I did not wait for his response. I slipped the gold medal card back into my clutch and stepped smoothly around his imposing frame. He was too stunned to physically stop me. Evelyn let out a quiet, strangled gasp, her hands flying to her diamond necklace as if she were suddenly struggling to breathe. I walked right past them, the heavy silk of my emerald gown brushing against my father's tuxedo leg. My two massive security guards stepped seamlessly into the space behind me, creating an impenetrable human wall between me and my parents. I walked straight to the grand double doors of the main ballroom and handed my gold card to the impeccably dressed head usher. He took one look at the platinum designation, his eyes widening with immediate profound respect. "Right this way, Miss Zoya," he said, bowing his head slightly and pulling the heavy doors open with a sweeping gesture. "Please, allow me to escort you to your table." I stepped into the sprawling, magnificent ballroom. The space was breathtaking, filled with towering floral centerpieces, crystal tableware, and hundreds of Atlanta's most influential figures taking their seats. The usher led me straight down the center aisle. We walked past rows and rows of standard tables, moving closer and closer to the brightly lit main stage. Finally, we arrived at the very front of the room. Positioned dead center directly at the foot of the podium where my father was scheduled to speak, was a sprawling VIP table covered in white silk and gold chargers. The nameplate in the center of the table was written in elegant calligraphy. It simply read, "Zoya Supply Chain Solutions." I took my seat facing the stage, perfectly positioned for the absolute carnage that was about to unfold. The first course was served with choreographed precision. A small army of waiters descended upon the ballroom, moving swiftly between the elegantly decorated tables, placing plates of seared scallops and artisan greens in front of the guests. I sat alone at my massive 10-person VIP table, sipping sparkling water. From my vantage point directly below the stage, I had a perfect view of my family sitting at their assigned table off to the right. The contrast between our seating arrangements was poetic. They were crammed together with several other mid-level donors, their faces pale and drawn. My father was rigidly cutting his food, refusing to look in my direction. My mother kept nervously checking her phone and whispering to Connor, who looked like a man walking to his own execution. But it was Alicia who caught my attention. She was unraveling right in front of my eyes. In the span of 30 minutes, I watched her drain 3 heavy pours of champagne. She was self-medicating, desperately trying to drown the terrifying reality that she was legally tethered to her husband's massive financial fraud. Her perfect posture had collapsed. The golden child was finally experiencing the crushing weight of real consequence, and it was breaking her. She kept glaring at my empty, sprawling table, her eyes burning with a toxic mixture of intense jealousy and pure, unadulterated panic. As the waiters began clearing the appetizer plates to make way for the main course, Alicia suddenly pushed her chair back. The legs of the chair scraped loudly against the ballroom floor. Connor tried to grab her wrist to pull her back down, but she violently yanked her arm away. She stumbled slightly, smoothing down her designer dress, and began marching purposefully toward the wooden stairs that led up to the main stage. My mother's eyes widened in absolute horror. Evelyn had wanted to orchestrate a careful, calculated smear campaign with the bishop in private. She had not planned for a drunken public meltdown. Alicia bypassed the event coordinator, who tried to gently block her path. She stepped up to the clear acrylic podium, tapping the microphone with a manicured fingernail. A sharp screech of feedback echoed through the massive ballroom, instantly silencing the low hum of conversation. Hundreds of faces turned toward the stage. Alicia gripped the sides of the podium, swaying just a fraction of an inch. Her face was flushed from the alcohol and the adrenaline. "Good evening, everyone," Alicia said. Her voice echoed loudly over the speakers, slightly slurred, but dripping with an artificial, practiced sweetness. "I know we are all so excited to honor my wonderful father Thomas later tonight. But before we bring out the main course, I felt compelled by the Spirit to come up here and say a few words about family, about loyalty, and about the tests of faith that we all must face." The room remained polite and quiet, expecting a standard, heartwarming, daughterly tribute. But I knew exactly what was coming. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap, waiting for the psychological warfare to begin. "We are gathered here tonight to celebrate charity." Alicia continued, her eyes scanning the crowd before locking directly onto me, sitting alone at my premium table. "We celebrate giving back to the community that raised us. But unfortunately, not everyone in this room understands the true meaning of that word. We live in a world where corporate greed can corrupt even the most sacred bonds. Sometimes people get a little bit of money, a little bit of secular success, and they completely forget where they came from. A low murmur rippled through the front tables. The politicians and business leaders sitting nearby began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. They were highly attuned to social cues, and they could instantly feel the venom bleeding through her supposedly righteous speech. Alicia leaned closer to the microphone, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the podium. The Bible speaks of the prodigal son, she preached, her voice rising in pitch, trembling with barely contained rage. But the text does not always tell you about the prodigal daughters. The ones who take the family resources, the ones who drain the lifeblood of their own parents to fund their selfish ambitions. The ones who turn their backs on their own blood the second they secure a lucrative buyout. They sit at the front of the room, flaunting their sudden wealth while plotting to leave their elderly parents destitute and homeless. The silence in the ballroom became absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet. The clinking of silverware completely stopped. No one was eating. No one was drinking. Every single eye in the room darted between Alicia on the stage and me sitting directly below her at the table, clearly marked with my company's name. Alicia had dropped the veil entirely. It was no longer a parable. It was a direct, vicious public assassination attempt on my character. My mother was frozen in her seat, her face completely drained of color. This was not the sophisticated manipulation she had planned. Alicia was looking unhinged, desperate, and deeply petty. Connor had his face buried in his hands, realizing that his wife was pouring gasoline onto a fire they could not extinguish. But Alicia was too drunk on champagne and her own bitterness to read the room. She thought she was delivering a masterful, righteous takedown. She thought she was rallying the congregation to her side, painting herself as the loyal daughter, defending her victimized parents. She pointed a trembling finger down at my table. "You cannot buy grace," Alicia declared, her voice cracking loudly over the sound system. "You cannot buy your way into heaven with a corporate sponsorship, and you certainly cannot buy forgiveness for betraying your own family. We see through the fancy dresses. We see through the fake corporate titles. God sees the ugly, greedy truth hiding behind the money. And this congregation will not be fooled by a wolf in sheep's clothing. We protect our own." She stood there, breathing heavily into the microphone, glaring down at me with absolute hatred. She was waiting for me to break. She wanted me to stand up and scream. She wanted me to run out of the ballroom in tears, deeply humiliated by the public shunning she had just orchestrated. She wanted the city's elite to look at me with disgust and pity. She wanted to prove to everyone that I was exactly the monster they claimed I was. Instead, I did absolutely nothing. I did not break eye contact. I did not show a single ounce of shame, anger, or embarrassment. I simply picked up my crystal water glass, raised it slightly in her direction, as if acknowledging a particularly entertaining theatrical performance, and took a slow, calm sip. The sheer lack of reaction completely short-circuited her brain. Alicia stood frozen at the podium, her mouth slightly open, the microphone capturing her heavy, panicked breathing. The suffocating silence of the room stretched on for several agonizing seconds. The congregation was not rallying behind her. They were staring at her with profound discomfort and growing alarm. She had violated the unspoken rules of high society by airing her dirty laundry in front of the most powerful people in Atlanta, and she had done it with the chaotic energy of a woman losing her grip on reality. The event coordinator finally rushed up the side stairs of the stage, gently placing a hand on Alicia's arm and pulling her away from the podium. Alicia did not resist. She let herself be led away, her brief moment of drunken courage completely evaporating under the crushing weight of the silent ballroom, leaving behind a pathetic, hollow reality. She stumbled back down the stairs and returned to her table, collapsing heavily into her chair. The damage was done. The atmosphere in the ballroom was completely poisoned. The smear campaign had been launched, messy and unhinged as it was. People at the surrounding tables were whispering frantically behind their hands, casting suspicious, questioning glances in my direction. The seeds of doubt had been planted in the minds of the congregation. My family had officially fired their biggest weapon. They had used the church stage to brand me as a traitor to my own blood. They had set the stage for their own destruction perfectly. Now it was my turn to take the microphone. I pushed my chair back from the table. The sound was barely a whisper compared to the loud, aggressive scrape Alicia had made just moments before. I stood up, the heavy silk of my emerald gown cascading perfectly around me. My private security detail immediately stepped forward from the shadows, their hands resting near their lapels, but I raised a single finger to signal them to hold their position. This was a stage I needed to take entirely on my own. The ballroom remained trapped in a suffocated, uneasy hush. Hundreds of influential guests watched me with wide, unblinking eyes as I walked slowly toward the wooden stairs. They were waiting for a reaction. They expected me to look humiliated, defensive, or angry. They expected me to march up to the podium and launch into a bitter, defensive screaming match to protect my name. That is exactly what my mother would have done. But I was not my mother. I moved with a fluid, terrifying grace, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished floor. I ascended the stairs and stepped up to the clear acrylic podium. The microphone was still angled slightly downward from where Alicia had gripped it. I reached out and calmly adjusted the stand. I looked out over the massive sea of faces. The city council members, the local politicians, the wealthy real estate developers, and the esteemed church elders were all staring back at me. I let my eyes slowly sweep across the room, establishing total command of the space before I even uttered a single syllable. Finally, my gaze landed on my family table. Alicia was slumped in her chair, her face flushed red, looking utterly miserable and terrified of what I was about to say. Connor was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were stark white. My father Thomas was completely rigid, his jaw clenched tight as he stared up at me with absolute dread. And my mother Evelyn looked as though she might physically pass out. She knew her smear campaign was hanging by a delicate thread, and she was powerless to stop me from cutting it. I turned my attention to the center table in the front row directly facing the stage. Sitting there in his tailored clerical robes was Bishop Davis, the patriarch of the Genesis congregation. He looked deeply concerned, clearly disturbed by the toxic energy that had hijacked his prestigious charity event. "Good evening, Bishop Davis, honored elders and esteemed guests," I began, my voice projecting through the massive speakers. My tone was smooth, perfectly modulated, and completely devoid of the frantic, drunken anger that had infected Alicia's speech. I paused for just a second, letting the calm resonance of my voice wash over the tense crowd. My sister Alicia is clearly very passionate about the integrity of our community. I continued, offering a warm, completely unbothered smile. And she is absolutely right about one thing. Passion, especially when fueled by the heavy burden of family expectations, can sometimes cause us to lose sight of the true purpose of our gatherings. But I believe her core message, however clumsily delivered, was rooted in a concept we all hold sacred: the protection of our people. I saw a few of the politicians in the front row relax their shoulders. The tension in the room began to diffuse. I was not attacking my sister. I was not defending myself against her ridiculous accusations of being a greedy, abusive daughter. By refusing to engage in her petty mudslinging, I instantly elevated myself above it. I made her look like an emotional, unstable woman throwing a tantrum while I looked like the composed, magnanimous executive who refused to be dragged into the dirt. "We are not here tonight to debate personal family grievances," I said, my voice gaining strength and carrying a commanding authority that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. "We are here tonight for the Genesis Community Outreach and Development Fund. We are here for the single mothers who need affordable housing in the south side of our city. We are here for the youth mentoring programs that keep our teenagers off the streets and put them into college classrooms. We are here for the elderly pensioners who rely on our charity initiatives to keep their heat on during the winter. That is the true legacy of this congregation. That is the only thing that actually matters in this room tonight." Bishop Davis nodded slowly, his expression softening into one of deep appreciation and relief. He had feared a catastrophic public scandal, but instead I was skillfully pulling the entire event back to its righteous purpose. "My grandfather Theodore taught me everything I know about business." I continued, slowly walking out from behind the acrylic podium so the entire room could see me clearly. He built his real estate empire from nothing, fighting through decades of systemic barriers. But he always told me that wealth is completely meaningless if it is hoarded behind gated driveways and country club memberships. True power is not about how much you can take from your community to enrich yourself. True power is about how much you can give back to ensure the next generation does not have to struggle the way you did. I looked directly at my father. He swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. He knew exactly what I was doing. I was invoking the name of the man whose legacy he had squandered and stolen. Recently, my company, Zoya Supply Chain Solutions, experienced a massive transition. I announced, letting my voice project to the very back rows of the ballroom. Thanks to an acquisition by Vanguard Holdings International, I have been blessed with resources that far exceed anything I could have ever imagined when I started coding in my tiny apartment 5 years ago. But to whom much is given, much is required. I took a slow, deliberate breath, ensuring the silence in the room was absolute before I delivered the final blow. Therefore, it is my absolute honor to announce tonight that Zoya Supply Chain Solutions is making a fully funded immediate personal donation to the Genesis Community Outreach and Development Fund. Tomorrow morning, a wire transfer will clear the church accounts in the amount of $1 million. For 3 long seconds, the ballroom was completely paralyzed. The number simply did not compute. $1 million was an astronomical sum, a figure that eclipsed the combined donations of every single wealthy family sitting in the room. It was the kind of money that could instantly fund every single community project the church had planned for the next decade. Then the reaction hit. It started with a loud, audible gasp from the wives of the city council members. That gasp was immediately followed by the sound of a chair being pushed back. Bishop Davis stood up. The powerful, respected leader of the community rose to his feet, a look of profound, overwhelming gratitude on his face. He began to clap, slowly at first, and then with intense, joyous enthusiasm. His reaction broke the dam. The entire front row of politicians and business leaders stood up. Then the second row. Then the entire ballroom. Hundreds of people rose to their feet, the sound of their applause rolling through the massive space like a physical shockwave. The cheers were deafening. The energy in the room completely inverted, transforming from a toxic, uncomfortable silence into a triumphant, explosive celebration. In less than 3 minutes, I had entirely rewritten the narrative. My mother's desperate smear campaign was instantly, permanently obliterated. You cannot convince a room full of people that a woman is a greedy, selfish, abusive thief when she just handed their community $1 million in liquid cash. By making the donation completely public, I had bought absolute immunity. I had established myself as the ultimate benefactor, the most powerful and generous figure in Atlanta high society. I looked down at my family table. They were the only 4 people in the entire ballroom who were not standing. They looked like they had been physically crushed by the sheer weight of the applause. Evelyn was staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. She finally realized that she was completely outmatched. I had not just beaten them financially, I had conquered them socially. I had taken their most powerful weapon, the church congregation, and turned it entirely into my own shield. But the applause was just the beginning. Buying the room was simply the setup. Now that I had their complete, undivided trust and adoration, it was time to show them exactly why their beloved charity fund needed $1 million bailout in the first place. I raised my hands, gesturing gently for the crowd to take their seats. It took nearly a full minute for the thunderous applause to die down. People were smiling, wiping joyful tears from their eyes, looking at me as if I were a savior. "Thank you," I said, my voice cutting through the lingering cheers. "Thank you all so much. But before I leave this stage, there is one more piece of business I need to attend to. Because protecting this community means more than just providing funding. It means ensuring transparency, honesty, and absolute accountability from the people we trust to manage our resources." I turned my head and looked directly at the leader of my private security detail standing by my VIP table. I gave him a single sharp nod. He immediately stepped forward holding the locked, slim briefcase. He walked smoothly up the wooden stairs, crossed the stage, and handed the briefcase directly to me. I placed it on the clear acrylic podium and snapped the dual locks open. The sharp metallic click echoed ominously over the microphone, and the remaining smiles in the ballroom began to slowly fade. I pulled a sleek, oversized ceremonial envelope from the briefcase. It was thick, heavy, and stamped with the gold crest of my company. But beneath it, resting securely in the bottom of the case, was the red binder. Desmond's forensic accounting report. The irrefutable proof of my family's massive financial crimes. I closed the empty briefcase, handed it back to my security guard, and picked up both the envelope and the red binder. Bishop Davis stepped forward to meet me at the center of the stage. The applause had faded into a respectful, deeply appreciative silence. The bishop was smiling broadly, reaching out with both hands to accept the ceremonial envelope. "Zoya," he said, his voice thick with genuine emotion, "this congregation is forever indebted to your generosity. You have truly shown us the meaning of grace tonight. May God bless you and your business." I smiled, a small, sad curve of my lips. "Thank you, Bishop Davis. But the grace of this community belongs to the people who built it. And it is my duty to ensure that the resources meant for those people are fiercely protected." I handed him the oversized envelope containing the ceremonial check. He took it with a slight bow of his head. Then I lifted the red binder and placed it directly on top of the envelope in his hands. The bishop looked down, slightly confused by the heavy sealed binder. "What is this, my child?" I leaned in close, ensuring the microphone did not pick up my next words. "That is the complete unredacted financial audit of the Genesis Community Outreach Fund." For the last 14 months, I whispered, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "It details the precise mechanism by which my father Thomas and my brother-in-law Connor embezzled nearly $3 million of church charity funds to save their failing real estate firm. The routing numbers, the offshore shell companies, and the forged authorization signatures are all clearly documented inside." Bishop Davis froze. The joyful warmth in his eyes instantly evaporated, replaced by a look of sheer, uncomprehending shock. He stared at me, his mind desperately trying to reconcile the generous benefactor standing in front of him with the horrifying accusation she had just delivered. I stepped back from the bishop and turned my head to look down at my family table. My father had half risen from his chair, his face a mask of absolute terror. He knew. The second he saw the red binder, he knew exactly what it was. "Do not take my word for it, Bishop," I said, raising my voice just enough to carry over the quiet stage. "Read the executive summary on the first page. I strongly suggest you do it before you hand out any awards tonight." I turned away from the podium and began walking back down the wooden stairs. I did not rush. I moved with the same deliberate, unhurried grace I had used to walk up. The room was deathly quiet, the guests sensing that something profound and deeply unsettling had just occurred between me and the bishop, though they could not yet hear the details. I reached the bottom of the stairs just as Bishop Davis snapped the red binder open. The silence in the ballroom shattered exactly 5 seconds later. A loud, strangled gasp echoed over the open microphone. Bishop Davis staggered backward, his hands trembling violently as he gripped the edges of the binder. He looked up, his eyes locking directly onto my father in the audience. The look of betrayal and pure righteous fury on the bishop's face was so intense, it caused the front row of politicians to physically recoil in their seats. Thomas the bishop thundered, his voice booming over the speaker, shaking the very foundation of the ballroom. "Is this true?" The single question hung in the air like a detonation. The entire congregation whipped their heads around, staring in shock at my father. Thomas collapsed back into his chair, the blood completely draining from his face. He opened his mouth to speak, to deny it, to spin his usual web of charming lies. But no sound came out. The sheer weight of the evidence and the public confrontation had entirely broken his spirit. Evelyn let out a sharp, hysterical sob, covering her face with both hands. The perfectly curated illusion she had spent 30 years building was disintegrating right in front of her eyes. But it was Connor who finally snapped. Connor, who had spent his entire life believing his white privilege and his prestigious law degree made him untouchable. Connor, who had thought he could effortlessly outsmart his black sister-in-law and use her as a human shield for his own incompetence. The pressure of the impending federal indictment combined with the catastrophic public humiliation of the gala completely shattered his fragile ego. He violently shoved his chair back. The heavy wooden chair crashed to the floor behind him. He did not look at the bishop. He did not look at me. He turned entirely on his own family. "You stupid, arrogant old man!" Connor screamed at my father, his voice raw and hysterical, echoing loudly across the silent ballroom. "I told you we could not hide the transfers forever. I told you Vanguard would find the discrepancies during the audit. But you just had to keep up appearances, didn't you? You had to have your country club memberships and your fancy suits while your firm was drowning." Thomas looked up at his son-in-law, his eyes wide with disbelief as Connor completely threw him under the bus in front of the entire city. "Connor, shut your mouth!" Thomas hissed desperately, looking around at the hundreds of horrified faces staring at them. "No!" Connor shrieked, slamming his fist down on the table, causing the crystal water glasses to shatter. "I am not going to prison for your vanity. I set up the shell companies to save your worthless legacy. And you—" He spun around, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger directly at Alicia's face. Alicia shrank back in her chair, tears streaming down her ruined makeup. "You signed those documents!" Alicia Connor yelled, completely abandoning any pretense of marital loyalty. "Do not sit there and cry like you are innocent. You knew exactly where the money to pay for your designer clothes was coming from. You loved spending the church's money just as much as your mother did." The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. The sophisticated, polite veneer of high society violently ripped apart. Several city council members immediately stood up, their faces red with outrage, shouting demands for an explanation. The church elders rushed the stage surrounding the bishop and frantically reading the pages of the red binder over his shoulder. Gasps of horror and loud, angry murmurs swept through the crowd as the realization set in. The prominent, wealthy family they had all admired and respected had been secretly robbing their community fund to pay for their lavish lifestyle. My mother Evelyn grabbed the sleeve of a passing event coordinator. "Call security!" she shrieked, completely detached from reality. "Have her arrested. Zoya forged those documents. She is lying." But no one was listening to her. The golden family of the Genesis congregation was publicly eating itself alive. Connor was pacing like a caged animal, screaming about immunity deals and throwing every single member of the family to the wolves to save his own skin. Alicia was sobbing hysterically, burying her face in the white tablecloth. Thomas sat completely frozen, his eyes vacant, watching the empire he had built on lies crumble to ash in a matter of seconds. I stood calmly at the edge of my VIP table, watching the destruction unfold. My two security guards flanked me, ensuring the chaotic crowd did not press too close. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I did not feel a shred of guilt. I felt a profound, settling peace. For 35 years, they had demanded that I shrink myself to fit into their shadow. They had demanded that I carry their burdens and cover their sins so they could shine in the light. But the light was incredibly unforgiving when it was finally shined on the truth. I picked up my small black clutch from the table. I did not need to stay to watch the rest. The bishop had the evidence. The congregation had the truth. The police would undoubtedly be called before the dessert was even served. I turned my back on the screaming, the crying, and the absolute ruin of the family that had tried to destroy me. I walked slowly and deliberately back up the center aisle of the ballroom. The angry, shouting crowd parted for me immediately. They did not look at me with the suspicion my mother had hoped to orchestrate. They looked at me with a mixture of awe, respect, and deep gratitude. I had not just saved their community fund. I had excised a cancer from their congregation. I pushed through the heavy brass doors of the ballroom and stepped out into the quiet, cool air of the hotel lobby. The screaming from inside was instantly muffled by the thick wood. I walked past the coat check and out into the crisp Atlanta night. My black town car was already waiting at the curb. The valet opened the door for me, offering a polite, unaware smile. "Thank you," I said, sliding into the soft leather seat. The door closed with a solid, satisfying thud. As the car pulled away from the Plaza Hotel and merged onto the brightly lit highway, I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. The war was over. I had won. But more importantly, I was finally truly free. Monday morning arrived with a blinding, beautiful clarity. I sat at the marble island of my kitchen sipping a cup of hot espresso and opened the browser on my laptop. The fallout from the charity gala had not just rippled through the city, it had exploded. The story had broken wide open on the Sunday evening local news broadcasts, and by Monday morning it was dominating every single media outlet in Atlanta. The front page of the Atlanta Business Chronicle featured a massive photograph of my father Thomas looking horrified on the ballroom stage right beneath a headline that read, "Prominent Real Estate Patriarch Accused of Defrauding Local Church Fund." The digital ink was merciless. Reporters had spent the entire weekend digging into the public records, and the resulting avalanche of truth was completely burying my family. By 9 o'clock, Desmond called me with the official casualty report. It was a total massacre. The moment the news of the embezzlement hit the wire, the creditors from my father's real estate firm panicked. 3 major domestic banks immediately called in their commercial loans, demanding full repayment within 24 hours. Because the firm had absolutely no liquid capital left, the banks initiated immediate seizure protocols on every single property in the family portfolio. The empire my grandfather had built and my father had squandered was officially gone. But the financial ruin was only half of the destruction. Desmond informed me with a deep chuckle that the State Bar Association had convened an emergency disciplinary hearing first thing Monday morning. Connor's law partners, terrified of being implicated in a federal wire fraud investigation, had officially terminated his employment and locked him out of his own office. The State Bar suspended his license indefinitely pending a full criminal review of the forged affidavit and the stolen church funds. But Connor, ever the cowardly opportunist, had fired his own parting shot before going down. Sensing the walls closing in, he had quietly filed for an emergency divorce from Alicia late Sunday afternoon. He was desperately attempting to sever his legal ties to her, hoping to claim that she was the sole mastermind behind the offshore shadow accounts, since her name was on the LLCs. He had abandoned his wife to face the federal prosecutors entirely alone, taking whatever hidden assets he could scrape together to hire a criminal defense attorney for himself. I closed my laptop, finished my espresso, and headed to the office. I walked through the glass doors of Zoya Supply Chain Solutions, feeling an incredible sense of lightness. The Vanguard acquisition funds had successfully cleared escrow at dawn. My company was safe. My future was secured. I had just sat down at my desk to review the hiring budget for the new quarter when my assistant Sarah buzzed the intercom. "Zoya." Sarah said, her voice tight with a mixture of disbelief and deep concern. "I have security on standby in the lobby. Your parents and your sister are down there. They are begging to see you. The front desk guard said they look like they have not slept in days. Do you want me to have them removed from the premises?" I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and looked out at the sprawling Atlanta skyline. For 35 years they had controlled the doors. They had dictated when I was allowed in and when I was cast out. Now they were standing at my gate asking for permission to enter my world. "No, Sarah." I replied, my voice perfectly calm. "Do not call security. Send them up to my office, but let the floor guards know to stand right outside my glass doors." A few minutes later, the heavy glass doors of my office slowly opened. I remained seated behind my desk, my hands folded neatly over the polished marble. The 3 people who walked into the room were completely unrecognizable from the arrogant, untouchable socialites who had tried to destroy me just a few days prior. My father looked like he had aged 20 years over the weekend. His shoulders were completely slumped, his face pale and covered in gray stubble. He was wearing a wrinkled suit jacket that looked like he had slept in it. My mother, Evelyn, was completely stripped of her usual armor. There were no diamonds around her neck. Her hair was pulled back into a messy knot, and her face was raw and puffy from hours of crying. Alicia trailed behind them, looking like a hollow shell of a human being. She was trembling, visibly clutching her arms around her chest, completely devastated by Connor's brutal betrayal and the looming threat of federal prison. They stood awkwardly in front of my desk, unsure of what to do with their hands. There was no arrogance left. There was no condescension. The towering pedestals they had built for themselves had been completely smashed to pieces. Zoya. My father began, his voice cracking into a weak, pathetic rasp. Please, you have to listen to us. I did not offer them a seat. I just looked at them, my face an unreadable mask. Go ahead, Thomas. I am listening. My mother suddenly lunged forward, pressing her hands flat against my desk. She began to weep. They were not the fake theatrical tears she used to manipulate the church congregation. This was raw, ugly, unadulterated terror. Zoya. My baby, please, she sobbed, her voice hitching wildly. We lost everything. The banks are taking the house today. They froze our personal checking accounts. Connor filed for divorce and left your sister with all the fraudulent debt. The district attorney called your father's lawyer this morning. They are drafting an indictment, Zoya. They are going to put him in federal prison. They are going to take Alicia away. Evelyn fell to her knees right there on the carpet of my office, grasping the edge of my desk as if it were a life raft. You have the Vanguard money now. You have $8 million. You can fix this. You can pay back the church fund and make the bishop drop the charges. You can hire the best defense attorneys in the state to keep your father and sister out of jail. You have to save us. We are your family. We are your blood. I know we made mistakes, but we can fix it. We can finally be a real family. I promise you, Zoya. We will do whatever you want. Just please do not let them destroy us. Alicia began to cry silently, tears streaming down her face, as she looked at me with absolute crushing desperation. Please, Zoya, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Connor left me. He blamed everything on me. I'm so scared. I do not want to go to prison. I sat there in complete silence, watching them beg. I watched the people who had spent my entire life making me feel small, difficult, and unworthy groveling on the floor of the empire I built. It was a surreal, staggering moment. If I wrote a check right now, I could be the hero. I could buy their eternal submission. I could finally have the parents who looked at me with gratitude instead of disgust. But I realized with a profound and absolute clarity that I did not want their gratitude. I did not want their version of a family. They were not sorry for the decades of emotional abuse. They were not sorry for stealing my college fund, ruining my credit, or trying to legally disown me. They were only sorry that they got caught, and they only wanted me because my bank account was the only thing standing between them and a prison cell. I slowly opened the top drawer of my desk. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, familiar linen envelope. I set the envelope on the marble surface and pulled out the legal document inside. The crisp, sharp rustle of the paper seemed to echo loudly in the quiet office. I smoothed the document flat and turned it around so it faced my father. The bright neon yellow sticky tabs Connor had placed on the pages just 5 days ago were still there. My father stared at the document, his bloodshot eyes widening as he recognized his own disownment contract. You told me on Thursday night that I was a disgrace to this family, I said, my voice dropping into a cold, lethal register. You told me I contributed nothing to your legacy. Connor drafted this document to legally erase me from your lives so you could use my grandfather's equity to hide your massive fraud. You brought this to a restaurant sat across from me and demanded that I sign it. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the bottom paragraph of the first page. Connor was very thorough, Dad. He wanted to make absolutely sure that I could not touch your assets, but in doing so, he wrote an ironclad severance clause. Let me read it to you just to refresh your memory. I leaned forward, looking directly into my father's terrified eyes. By signing this document, Zoya officially relinquishes any future claims to the family estate, waives her right to any future inheritances, and absolves herself of any and all financial liabilities, debts, or obligations connected to Thomas, Evelyn, and Alicia. I slid the document all the way across the desk until it bumped against my mother's trembling hands. You weaponized the law to throw me away when you thought I was useless, I said quietly. You wanted a clean legal break. Well, congratulations. You got exactly what you paid your lawyers for. Because my signature is on that line, I am legally, entirely, and permanently severed from your catastrophic mess. I cannot be held responsible for your debts. I cannot be forced to pay your legal fees. And I certainly have no moral obligation to bail out a criminal syndicate that tried to use me as a human shield. But Zoya, my father, croaked, his hands shaking as he reached for the paper. We did not mean it. We were desperate. You cannot just leave us with nothing. I owe you absolutely nothing. I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. I am not paying back the money you stole from a church. I am not hiring lawyers to defend criminals. You engineered your own destruction. You built a house out of lies, and now it is burning to the ground. You do not get to come to my door asking for water. I reached out and pressed the button on my intercom. Sarah, please send the security team in. My guests are leaving, and they will not be returning, ever. My mother let out a horrific wailing scream. She collapsed completely against the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Alicia squeezed her eyes shut, burying her face in her hands as her knees finally buckled. My father just stood there staring at the disownment contract, the absolute reality of his own hubris completely crushing the life out of his eyes. The heavy glass doors swung open. My two massive security guards stepped into the room. They did not need to use force. There was absolutely no fight left in any of them. The guards simply reached down, helped my mother to her feet, and gestured toward the hallway. Thomas turned around like a sleepwalker, his shoulders slumped, his spirit entirely broken. He walked out of the office without looking back. Alicia followed him, her head hung in absolute defeat, leaning heavily on the glass doorframe to keep herself upright. Evelyn was the last to leave, guided firmly by the security guards, her loud, tragic sobs echoing down the hallway until the elevator doors finally slid shut. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows. I looked down at the busy Atlanta streets, watching the tiny cars navigating the concrete arteries of the city. A few minutes later, I saw the three of them emerge from the glass lobby doors of my building onto the sidewalk below. Even from 40 stories up, I could see the toxicity immediately bleeding back into their dynamic. My father threw his hands up in the air, clearly screaming at Alicia. Alicia screamed back, pointing her finger aggressively at him. Evelyn stood between them, crying and trying to physically push them apart. The perfect, pristine, high society family was standing on a public sidewalk, tearing each other to pieces like wild animals over the scraps of their ruined lives. I watched them for a long moment, feeling the final heavy chains of my childhood snap and fall away. I turned away from the window and walked back to my desk. The silence in my office was beautiful. It was not the tense, suffocating silence of a family dinner, waiting for the next insult to be thrown. It was the clear, vibrant silence of a space that belonged entirely to me. For 35 years, I had been searching for a place at a table that was specifically designed to keep me hungry. I had spent my entire life trying to prove my worth to people who were utterly incapable of recognizing value unless it came with a designer label and a massive price tag. But the truth is, you cannot heal a generational curse by sitting in the same toxic house and hoping the poison suddenly turns into water. You break the curse by walking out the front door, burning the house down, and building your own empire on solid ground. I did not lose a family. I excised a sickness. I stepped into my own unburdened power, realizing that true family is not defined by shared DNA or the obligations of blood. Family is defined by mutual respect, unwavering support, and the people who celebrate your victories instead of trying to steal them. I have a brilliant mentor. I have a fierce, loyal team. I have a future that is entirely my own to write. I finally built my own table, and every single person sitting at it actually deserves to be there. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic people who disguise their abuse as family loyalty, I want you to know that the guilt will fade, but the freedom lasts forever. You do not owe your life to people who refuse to love you properly. Tell me in the comments how you found the strength to walk away and build your own peace. Please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with anyone who needs to hear that they are not required to set themselves on fire just to keep their family warm. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, keep protecting your peace and never apologize for your success.